Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. This channel dives into real-life stories about beings from beyond our world, designed to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Get comfortable and let's explore the unknown. Tonight, we're stepping into the shadows and uncovering stories about mysterious figures who arrive when the unexplainable happens. The men in black. They come without warning. Black suits, blank expressions, asking questions that slice through silence like a knife. For decades, witnesses have described the same chilling encounter: a knock at the door after a UFO sighting, a visit that feels more like a warning than an interview. In this collection, you'll hear 29 true accounts from around the world. So settle in, slow your breathing, and drift into the unknown. Because tonight, the visitors are already here. Let's start with Herbert Hopkins and his encounter in Old Orchard Beach, 1976. It was a quiet evening when this respected physician and part-time UFO investigation consultant received an unexpected phone call. The caller was calm and precise, introducing himself as a fellow researcher wanting to discuss the case Hopkins was working on. Something about the conversation felt important, urgent. And minutes later, a knock at the door. Hopkins opened it to find a man unlike any he'd ever seen, thin to the point of frailty, with skin so pale it seemed bloodless. A perfectly tailored black suit without a single crease, topped with a derby hat casting shadows over his face. As the man stepped inside, the light revealed extraordinary details. His skin looked almost waxen, stretched evenly over bone, lips of an unnatural, vivid red so sharply defined they seemed painted. His movements were unnaturally precise, lacking the small, unconscious adjustments that typically characterize human motion. Hopkins sat in the living room with a visitor who wasted no time with pleasantries. The man's questions were direct, as if he already knew the contours of the main UFO case and was simply confirming details. He probed about witnesses, physical trace evidence, and its storage. Throughout the exchange, the visitor maintained unbroken eye contact. Midway through their conversation, he reached into his pocket and drew out a small coin. Rolling it slowly between his fingers with deliberate movement, Hopkins watched as something extraordinary happened. The coin began to fade, its edges blurring, shine dulling, and within moments dissolved entirely, leaving nothing between the man's fingertips. "You will stop your work on this case," the man stated flatly, his tone carrying no threat, just pure finality. His subsequent questions seemed designed to test Hopkins's responses for consistency. As the conversation progressed, the man's demeanor changed. His speech slowed, punctuated by measured pauses, and his movements grew increasingly stiff and mechanical. "My energy is running low. I must leave," he finally announced. Rising carefully, he adjusted his derby hat and walked to the door. Hopkins followed him onto the porch, watching as the man descended the steps and disappeared into darkness. No sounds of a car or engine followed his departure. That night, Hopkins acted with immediate and decisive purpose. He went to his office and methodically destroyed every UFO research file. Case notes, photographs, and transcripts vanished before morning. The change in his behavior was stark and sudden. In the days that followed, Hopkins became unreachable. Calls from fellow investigators went unanswered. When one colleague finally connected with him, his responses were brief and flat. "I'm stepping away from that work," he said, offering no further explanation. A scheduled visit from an out-of-state researcher was politely but firmly cancelled. Locally, the shift was subtly noticed. A librarian at the Old Orchard Beach Historical Society observed that Hopkins, who had been consistently requesting materials on unusual aerial phenomena, abruptly stopped his research. It was like a door had suddenly closed. Even neighbors noticed the difference. Word of the incident spread quietly through letters, phone calls, and conversations at small UFO investigator gatherings. While the details were sometimes subtly altered in retellings, the central image remained unchanged. A pale man in a black suit arriving swiftly after a phone call, performing an impossible act with a coin, and leaving behind an empty resolve where an active investigation had once been. A neighbor remarked to a friend that Hopkins seemed more private after that week. His home's curtains were drawn more frequently, and the porch light that once stayed on into the evening now remained dark. Speculation about the encounter emerged quickly. Some pointed to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, referencing its history of interviewing and potentially discouraging UFO witnesses. Others considered the FBI, noting its occasional surveillance of civilian researchers during the previous decade. However, many classified it among the clearest examples of a Men in Black encounter, highlighting the visit's precision and Hopkins' complete cessation of work afterward. At a small New England conference months later, the speaker alluded to the case without naming Hopkins directly. Those familiar with the details exchanged knowing glances. The illusion was sufficient. Friends noticed subtler changes. Hopkins stopped attending evening gatherings where local enthusiasts shared stories. His interest in fringe topics vanished entirely. One former colleague put it bluntly, "The man I knew was curious even about the strangest claims." After that night, that curiosity disappeared. By the month's end, Hopkins had removed himself from all UFO-related correspondence. When an old acquaintance visited his office unannounced, Hopkins greeted him warmly but refused to discuss any aspect of the case. "It's closed," he said quickly, shifting the conversation to fishing, weather, and local news. In the years that followed, the Herbert Hopkins case settled into a quiet but enduring corner of MIB lore, cited in books, mentioned in lectures, and debated in small circles. Its strength lay not in physical evidence, but in its precision. A lone man, a brief meeting, a single inexplicable demonstration, and the complete silencing of a willing researcher. Hopkins himself never publicly elaborated. Not in June 1947, over Puget Sound, Washington, Harold Dahl's routine patrol boat trip turned extraordinary. With his son, their dog, and 2 crewmen aboard, 6 metallic discs suddenly appeared overhead, moving in a tight formation. One disc faltered, tilting and dropping molten debris. Fragments hissed into the water, some striking the boat. A piece burned Dahl's son, while another killed their dog. Dahl steered clear as the formation regrouped and vanished into the haze. He kept a few shards from the deck, some light and brittle, others unnervingly heavy. Back on shore, he shared the story only with a small circle, his boss Fred Chrisman and 2 close friends. Dahl had no interest in making the incident public, not even telling his wife. By the following morning, something felt off. An unexpected phone call came to his home from an unrecognizable voice, polite but firm. The caller suggested a breakfast meeting at a Tacoma diner, naming the place and time without. Waiting for Dahl's response, at the diner, the man was already seated in a back booth, wearing a crisp black suit, white shirt, and narrow black tie. His hat rested neatly beside him. As Dahl slid into the opposite seat, the man offered no name, no handshake. He simply fixed Dahl with an unblinking gaze and began speaking. "You had quite an experience out there on the water," he said in a low, deliberate voice. Then he proceeded to recount every single detail with remarkable precision. The number of craft, the wobbling disc, the debris spray, the injury to Dahl's son, the dog's death. Dahl sat in stunned silence, wondering how this stranger could know such specific information. At one point, the man leaned in slightly. It would be better, he suggested, for Dahl and his family to forget what they had seen. There was no explicit threat, no visible anger, but a weight behind the words suggested the outcome was already determined. Dahl noticed the man's pale face, sharp yet oddly flat features. When asked about the incident in later years, he would only say, "It happened exactly as I said it did. I've said all I need to say. For those studying the Men in Black phenomenon, this stands as a rare case where the purpose of the visit was achieved without intimidation or force." The files were gone, the work abandoned, and the witness stepped away, all within a single evening of the Maury Island incident. Someone accustomed to keeping his expressions minimal spoke with careful, almost rehearsed precision. A conversation lasted barely 15 minutes. At its conclusion, the man buttoned his jacket and left without paying for his coffee. Through the diner's front window, Dole watched him enter a black sedan parked at the curb, which quickly merged into the light morning traffic and disappeared. The meeting left an unsettling impression on Dole. He sensed the encounter wasn't about persuasion, but rather a direct delivery of instructions he was meant to understand. That night, sleep eluded Dole. He kept replaying the moment the man described his son's injury. What struck him wasn't just the knowledge itself, but the casual manner in which it was shared, as if discussing something utterly mundane. In subsequent days, Dahl deliberately avoided discussing the sighting. When a local reporter inquired about rumors of strange discs over the Sound, he dismissively suggested a misunderstanding or mistake. Within a week, he publicly retracted his entire account. But the story had already spread beyond his control. Chrisman, still convinced something extraordinary had occurred, wrote to an Army Air Force contact offering to demonstrate the debris. This led to two intelligence officers, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, flying from Hamilton Field in California to conduct interviews. They questioned Dahl extensively, seeking precise details about times, positions, and object descriptions. Their investigation included examining the boat's damage and collecting debris samples. Their records noted the material's unusual slag-like texture, distinctly different from common alloys. They also documented inconsistencies in Dahl's account, shifting event sequences and uncertainty about exact distances. They couldn't determine whether these discrepancies stemmed from genuine confusion or Dahl's reluctance to speak fully. After completing their interviews, Davidson and Brown boarded their B-25 bomber to return to California, carrying the debris samples. Tragically, the plane caught fire and crashed near Kelso, Washington, killing both men. The debris was completely destroyed in the blaze. News of the crash spread quickly through military channels but was presented to the public as a routine accident. No mention was made of the officer's cargo. For Dahl, the event only reinforced his decision to remain silent. He had been instructed clearly to do so. A single incident would come to define early encounters with the mysterious men in black, an event that would set a pattern for decades to follow. Harold Dahl's experience at a diner became a pivotal moment in understanding these strange interactions. While the initial UFO sighting might have been brief, the subsequent encounter was anything but fleeting. The men who visited wore black suits and carried an unsettling sense of authority. They knew details they shouldn't have known, spoke with calculated precision, and left witnesses feeling deeply uncomfortable. No credentials, no names, just an overwhelming sense that they were in complete control of the conversation. Years later, similar reports would emerge from across the country. Witnesses described unexpected visits from men who seemed to know intimate details about their experiences, who issued instructions without explicit threats, and who vanished as quickly as they appeared. The Maury Island incident became the earliest documented example of this phenomenon. For Dahl, the UFO discs had been a momentary curiosity, but the man in the diner was different, deliberate, unavoidable, a consequence that would repeat itself in countless stories to come. Another stark example was the Robert Richardson incident in July 1967. Late one night on a quiet Toledo road, the 19-year-old university student experienced something unusual. A metallic flash caught his headlights, and moments later his car struck something. Pulling over, he found a small, unusually cool, silvery fragment. Richardson placed the piece in his bedroom drawer after discussing it with a local UFO research group. 2 days later, a knock at his front door would change everything. When he opened it, two men stood waiting, their presence as unexpected as the metallic object he'd discovered. The Air Force would eventually label the entire affair a hoax, citing Dahl's retraction. But the timeline, the sighting, the mysterious visit, the reluctant witness, and the unexplained loss of physical evidence didn't add up for many researchers. It became a foundational story in the growing mythology of men in black encounters. The men arrived on the porch, an intimidating duo dressed in dark suits that seemed impervious to the sweltering July heat. One appeared to be in his late 30s, the other older, perhaps in his 50s, both pale and devoid of emotion. The older man initiated the conversation. Mr. Richardson had something that did not belong to him, he stated. Richardson, caught off guard, asked for clarification. A piece of metal from an incident, the man explained in a flat, almost mechanical tone, had been taken by Richardson. Initially, Richardson denied the accusation, uncertain of these men's identities or intentions. The younger man stepped forward, producing a notepad with Richardson's address, driver's license, and university ID. Their knowledge was precise, their message clear. "We know where you are, we know what you have," the older man continued. "You will give it to us." When Richardson requested identification, the men offered no official credentials. They claimed no affiliation with law enforcement or government. The younger man simply stated, "It is important for your safety that you comply." Their presence carried an unspoken authority, a weight that needed no explanation. The conversation was brief, lasting no more than 5 minutes. Richardson informed them the piece had already been sent for analysis, a truthful statement. The older man's expression remained unchanged, but he leaned closer, lowering his voice with a veiled threat. "If you are lying, it will be worse for you." Without another word, they turned in unison and walked to a black 1963 Cadillac sedan parked at the curb. The car disappeared silently into the next block, as if it had never existed. If Richardson believed this encounter was the end, he was mistaken. 3 nights later, around 9 p.m., another knock came. This time, a single man, younger than the previous pair, wore the same dark suit and a pale grey fedora pulled low over his brow. Richardson would later describe his skin as having an odd, unnaturally smooth texture. The man's tone was more conversational, but the message remained unchanged. The fragment must be returned. When Richardson again insisted it was no longer in his possession, the man smiled faintly and delivered a chilling response. "You will retrieve it." Then came the question that would haunt Richardson forever. "How would you like it if we harmed someone close to you? Your wife, perhaps?" Richardson wasn't married, but he had been dating a woman steadily for months. The threat hung in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. The moment the men spoke Richardson's full name and address, he sensed something was wrong. With a slight tip of his hat, the man simply walked away, leaving Richardson feeling exposed. From that night forward, everything changed. The UFO fragment was already out of his hands, passed to a researcher for metallurgical testing. Yet the precision of the men's knowledge about his life continued to haunt him. A black Cadillac began appearing near his apartment, sometimes idling at a distance when he walked to his car. Other times, it was just far enough away to make him question whether he was truly being watched. As Richardson paid more attention, he realized even routine activities like grocery shopping or visiting the library seemed accompanied by shadowy figures. A man in a suit lingered at the magazine rack. Another sat in a diner's corner booth, perpetually reading a newspaper without turning a page. Richardson shared his experience with only a few people, including a university physics professor with an interest in UFO reports. The professor's response was chilling. "If those men are who I think they are, you don't want to test their patience." Despite the implicit threats, Richardson never approached the police. In 1967, walking into a Toledo precinct to report men in black suits threatening him over a UFO fragment seemed like an invitation to be dismissed or, worse, attract attention from the very agencies he suspected were behind the visits. Within the local UFO research community, whispers began circulating about how Richardson's case fit a troubling pattern. NICAP files documented similar incidents. Physical trace UFO cases where witnesses who retrieved materials were visited by unidentified men, often presumed to be connected to the Air Force's OSI or another federal office, who would then reclaim the evidence. In most of these cases, the material disappeared forever. When the fragment's analysis finally returned, the results were inconclusive. The lab noted unusual structural properties but stopped short of declaring it extraterrestrial. Before a second round of testing could be conducted, the fragment vanished under unexplained circumstances. As suddenly as they had appeared, the men in black disappeared. The car was gone, the strangers stopped showing up, and life seemed to return to normal. Yet Richardson was left with an enduring sense of being watched, a feeling that would never completely leave him. Not Richardson's encounters with forces outside legal and rational boundaries became legendary within UFO research circles. In discussions with UFO authors years later, Richardson maintained careful distance from definitive claims. He never stated the ways cared. He never stated the men were extraterrestrial, nor did he assert the fragment originated from another world. Instead, he consistently highlighted their unusual characteristics, an eerie controlled demeanor devoid of emotion, and an unsettling knowledge that seemed to transcend normal information channels. His account became another pivotal entry in the Men in Black mystery. Researchers interpreted it as a classic scenario where the objective wasn't outright denial, but systematic removal of physical evidence. What endures is not the brief UFO sighting, but the aftermath. The incident transformed into a quintessential MIB case study, an encounter involving physical object recovery, followed by a precise, swift intervention from unidentified agents. Their intimidation extended beyond Richardson to his entire social network, ultimately ensuring the potential evidence disappeared from public view. Richardson's own reflection captured the encounter's psychological impact. If they wanted peace, they could have taken it that night. Returning twice meant something deeper. They wanted me to remember them. For many researchers, this psychological manipulation defines Men in Black encounters. Physical artifacts might vanish, sighting details might blur, but the deliberate surgical disruption of a witness's life leaves an indelible mark. Spring 1968 in Jersey City, New Jersey. Mary Robinson was heading to work, coat drawn tight against the morning's chill, when something caught her attention. A black sedan sat parked at the street's edge, occupied by a man in a dark suit, white shirt and black tie. His face was pale, features sharp yet bizarrely static, as if his expression had been set hours earlier and forgotten. He stared directly at her. Initially, she assumed a mundane explanation, perhaps waiting for someone, a neighbor getting a ride. But the man's gaze never wavered. His eyes tracked her movement as she walked toward the corner, creating an unnerving sense of persistent surveillance even after she turned down the block. Jack Robinson, Mary's husband, was no stranger to such unusual attention. Not Jack had spent years quietly gathering reports, interviewing witnesses, and submitting findings to national organizations as a respected figure in the New Jersey UFO research community. Recently, he'd been focusing on a series of close encounter reports suggesting unusual local activity. The night before, Jack had mentioned to Mary that he felt someone had been in their apartment while they were out. Papers on his desk had been moved, a drawer slightly ajar that he was certain he'd closed. Nothing was missing, but the disarray seemed too deliberate to be accidental. He'd brushed it off as possible carelessness. When Mary saw the man in the car the next morning, her unease sharpened. She noted the time, just after 8 a.m., and the license plate number, though the sequence seemed strangely unmemorable, quickly sliding out of her thoughts. That evening, Mary asked Jack if anyone had contacted him recently about his work. He frowned and shook his head, asking why. She told him about the man in the car. Jack listened intently, his expression tightening as she described the suit and unblinking stare. By the conversation's end, Jack was already considering who in their circle might quietly confirm whether they were under observation. The next morning, the man returned. Same car, same position, same posture. This time, Mary saw him adjust something in his lap, possibly a notebook or small device, while his gaze remained fixed on their building's front. On the third day, Mary told Jack she was certain this wasn't random. She urged him to call someone. Jack decided to reach out to Timothy Green Beckley, a fellow UFO researcher known for pursuing leads others avoided. Beckley didn't hesitate. He instructed Jack and Mary to stay put and went directly to Jim Mosley, a photographer interested in documenting UFO phenomenon. Day 4 began identically. Pale sunlight, cool air, and the black sedan parked across from the Robinsons' apartment. The man inside matched Mary's description perfectly: dark suit, low-pulled hat, white shirt buttoned high, with a neatness that seemed almost staged. Beckley and Mosley parked half a block away and approached on foot, keeping their movements calculated. The man sat motionless as Beckley and Mosley approached. His stillness was striking. No fidgeting, no restlessness, as if he could remain in that exact spot indefinitely. Even as two people passed by, his gaze remained fixed on the Robinsons' building. Mosley raised his camera and snapped a quick photograph. The man didn't react at all. Neither the camera's click nor the nearby strangers seemed to register with him. Beckley would later describe the moment as photographing a breathing mannequin. This image would become legendary in Men in Black lore. A grainy black and white shot showing the man in the sedan, his hat casting a shadow over his eyes, his expression neither a smile nor a frown. Back in their apartment, Jack and Mary felt a sense of validation. They weren't imagining things. Someone was definitely watching them. Jack's UFO research wasn't classified or overtly threatening. He compiled reports, tracked rumors, and published in small newsletters. Recently, however, he'd been speaking with witnesses whose accounts suggested something more significant: physical trace evidence, ground, imprints, strange residues, and even recovered objects. If these claims held weight, they might have attracted unwanted attention. The Robinsons speculated about the man's potential affiliation. Could he be connected to a formal investigative body like the FBI or Air Force Office of Special Investigations? Both agencies were known for monitoring UFO-related cases. His consistent presence outside their home suggested this might be an authorized surveillance operation, a thought that offered little comfort. Subtle signs of intrusion began to accumulate. Mary noticed her apartment door's lock seemed mishandled. A jewelry box was moved with precise, unsettling accuracy. Jack's case notes showed signs of unauthorized examination. Pages stacked differently, edges slightly curled as if handled with damp fingers. While he couldn't definitively prove interference, the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The ongoing observation from outside was creating a growing sense of unease. Something was happening, but its purpose remained frustratingly unclear. Jack began noticing something strange beyond the initial car parked outside their apartment. During the first week, a second figure appeared, another man in a dark suit standing silently in the building's lobby at odd hours, always vanishing before Jack returned. Neighbors started talking. A woman down the hall mentioned the government guy in the car. Another tenant told Mary about two men in suits walking slowly through the hallway late one night, stopping outside their door without a word or a knock. Tension grew in subtle, persistent ways. Jack started checking the street before leaving. Mary drew the curtains during the day, uneasy about unseen eyes watching. Their phone calls felt unnatural, with occasional static and mysterious clicks. When Beckley returned a week later, the car was still present. He and Mosley decided on a direct approach, walking past the sedan and greeting the man. The response was chilling, no acknowledgement, no movement. The man's unblinking stare and perfect stillness made Beckley more uncomfortable than any direct threat. By the 10th day, the black sedan disappeared without explanation. No other watchers remained visible. The Robinsons' life returned to routine, but the experience lingered. Jack became more cautious, locking research notes and limiting discussions about his investigations. Mary never forgot the face in the car window and the heavy feeling of being watched. Mosley's photograph sparked debate among UFO researchers. Some argued the man was a private investigator or government operative monitoring Jack. Others saw something more profound, an archetype of the mysterious men in black captured in daylight, watching and waiting without leaving a trace. In later years, the Robinson case would be cited in conferences and books as a clear visual documentation of MIB surveillance, with the photograph becoming a pivotal piece of evidence in understanding these enigmatic encounters. The night's strange events surfaced in an unexpected conversation that began with absolute certainty. Air Force reservist Paul Miller and his hunting companions experienced something extraordinary near Minot, North Dakota, in 1961. A cold, silent evening turned surreal when they spotted a glowing object in a nearby field. Two unusual figures emerged, moving in an unnatural manner toward a fence line. Miller instinctively raised his rifle and fired. Suddenly, they found themselves back in the car heading to Mine Air Force Base. Their watches indicated hours had passed, yet no one could remember leaving the field. Unwritten rules prevailed. No report would be filed. None wanted to explain the incident to their superiors, understanding that discussing such unusual events could attract unwelcome attention from intelligence officers. The next morning, Miller was at his desk when an authoritative call arrived. "Stay where you are. Visitors are on their way." The tone allowed no questioning. Within an hour, two identically dressed men appeared, dark suits, white shirts, narrow black ties, and eerily blank expressions. Without introduction, one stated flatly, "Mr. Miller, you had an encounter last night." Miller hesitated. He hadn't told anyone about the incident. "I don't know what you mean," he responded. The second man placed a folder on his desk containing a typed sheet with intimate details. His name, address, family information. This unexpected surveillance represented more than a simple encounter. It was a reminder that being watched doesn't always require direct confrontation. Sometimes the most effective pressure leaves nothing tangible behind except a photograph and the memory of silent observers whose reasons remain unexplained. Not Miller's service record lay before him, meticulously detailed down to his elementary school. As he stared at the document, two men approached. Their message was clear and direct. He had seen something he shouldn't have. Miller's chest tightened. "Who told you that?" Silence was their only response. One man leaned in, speaking in a flat, emotionless tone. "We know what you saw. We know where you live." forget last night. When Miller pressed for more information about their affiliation, they dismissed his question. The encounter was brief, lasting barely 10 minutes. They departed as suddenly as they arrived, walking in perfect synchronization to a black sedan parked in a restricted area of the base. The vehicle, typical of official government transportation, drew no suspicion. It pulled away without a sound. That evening, Miller double-checked every lock and kept his rifle close. In the days that followed, a black car began appearing at irregular intervals near his home. Through his curtains, he spotted a man in dark sunglasses sitting motionless in the driver's seat. His hunting companions started experiencing similar strange occurrences, unfamiliar cars trailing them, men in suits hovering near their homes, vanishing when confronted. Though they hadn't discussed the incident, the surveillance was undeniable. At work, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations would halt when he entered a room. A colleague hinted at higher-level intervention before quickly changing the subject. Unknown men in civilian clothes watched him near the mess hall, their eyes tracking his every move. The psychological impact was gradual but profound. Miller became hyper-vigilant. He checked rear-view mirrors constantly, hesitated before entering his home, and scanned parked vehicles reflexively. Routine sounds of phone ringing, footsteps in the hallway now triggered anxiety. His family noticed the transformation. Dinner conversations became sparse. He would sit up late, staring out windows for hours. When his wife inquired about his state of mind, he would deflect, but she understood something was fundamentally wrong. Miller's encounter was more than a simple case of fatigue. Within the base community, word traveled quickly, even without official channels. No one directly confronted him, but Miller sensed his name had been attached to something unusual. A mechanic he knew well began avoiding eye contact for weeks. Another colleague quietly warned him to be careful about who he talked to. Weeks turned into months, and the surveillance gradually tapered off. Yet the memory remained vivid. Miller left the Air Force Reserve a few years later, but the incident never truly left him. When researchers began documenting patterns of men in black visits in the late 1960s and early 70s, Miller recognized the descriptions instantly. The unshakable formality, the strange knowledge, the quiet but heavy intimidation. It wasn't until the late 1970s that Miller agreed to share his story in detail with a UFO researcher. Even then, he hesitated, worried that talking about it might summon them back. For years after the visit, he had nightmares about returning to the office and finding the two men already sitting and waiting for him. By the time the account entered UFO literature, the original sighting had become almost secondary. The focus was on the response's precision and speed, how they approached within hours, armed with personal and military background, and issued a warning without any official acknowledgement. Researchers noted the unusual level of coordination. If the men were from a recognized military or intelligence agency like OSI, Air Force Intelligence, or the CIA, they should have identified themselves. But they hadn't. The questions lingered. How had they gained such quick access to Miller's service file and movements? And if their goal was to silence him, why make their presence so obvious? Miller didn't dwell on broader theories. For him, this was a personal memory that remained sharp in all the wrong ways. He remembered the slight delay before each man spoke, as if following an internal rhythm. He recalled how their footsteps matched exactly when turning to leave, how their shoulders never shifted, how not a strand of hair seemed out of place. Even decades later, when Miller was well into middle age, he kept the storytelling sparse. He sometimes ended it by saying, "I was the quiet that got to me. They didn't have to yell. They already knew I'd remember every word." Among those who heard him speak, the impact was lasting. 1953, another case emerged from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Albert K. Bender wasn't just another casual observer, but the founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, a small yet growing network of enthusiasts who traded sightings, theories, and clippings by mail. His top-floor apartment at 784 Broad Street served as the Bureau's headquarters, with every surface covered in files and correspondence. That summer, Bender was preparing an issue of Space Review, the Bureau's bulletin, in which he hinted that the UFO mystery had been solved, a conclusion he planned to reveal in the next issue. But something changed before that could happen. Strange occurrences began at his desk during nighttime work, a heaviness in the air, a faint sulfur or ozone-like odor, blurring thoughts, and a pressure building behind his eyes. One late July evening, these sensations intensified dramatically. Alone in the apartment, Bender noticed the clock passing 9 p.m. as the air temperature dropped. The desk lamp's light dimmed without flickering. Suddenly, he realized he wasn't alone. 3 men stood in the room, having entered without a sound. They were dressed identically: black suits, black hats, narrow black ties, and crisp white shirts. Their skin appeared pale, almost grey. Bender would later describe their eyes as having an unusual, luminous quality. In small UFO discussion groups and private correspondences, this case became a quintessential example of men in black behavior. What made it remarkable wasn't the content of their warning, but the manner of the encounter. It demonstrated that the MIB's power lay not in force, but in an absolute certainty of purpose. They arrived at will, spoke their piece, and departed without seeking permission. For those experiencing such an encounter, the subsequent silence was never truly empty. Instead, it was a charged waiting space, a clear understanding that if the door were to open again, it would not be by chance. Now here's a rewritten version. The men stood motionless, their presence filling the room with an unsettling silence. No one sat, no hats were removed. Speaking in a flat, emotionless tone, without any discernible accent, one of them addressed Bender directly. They knew about his work collecting information on flying saucers, and their message was unequivocal. Stop. Bender froze, hands resting on his knees. While they hadn't explicitly threatened him, the communication was final. His mouth went dry. As he attempted to speak, his voice failed him. One of the men moved closer, revealing a strange metallic object at his wrist, smooth and curved, partially hidden beneath his sleeve. A wave of dizziness washed over him. His vision blurred momentarily, then cleared. Suddenly the men had vanished. The following days passed in a fog. Headaches intensified. Hours slipped away unnoticed. He began leaving work early, wandering aimlessly through city streets. Letters from bureau members went unanswered. Early September brought their return. This time, Bender lay attempting to combat one of his relentless headaches when the air thickened. That familiar sulphurous, metallic smell permeated the room. 3 figures materialized at the foot of his bed. They communicated without words, suggesting he was dangerously close to uncovering something significant. Bender would later describe their communication as a blend of spoken words and fully formed thoughts that seemed to materialize in his mind. One produced a small circular object with a surface that appeared to ripple like liquid metal. A sudden chill gripped him. The room seemed to recede. Voices became muffled, as if originating from a distant floor, then darkness. Upon waking, the room was empty. Hours had vanished. Within a week, Bender made his decision. The International Flying Saucer Bureau was closed. In the October issue of Space Review, he published a cryptic notice. The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is known, but information is being withheld by order from a higher source. No further explanation followed. There would be no next issue. To his members, this made no sense. The Bureau had been thriving, with a network spanning multiple countries. Now, it had ceased operations overnight without explanation. Publicly, Bender remained silent. Privately, he shared minimal details with a select few. Not in 1953, Albert Bender became one of the first to encounter the mysterious men who would later become known in UFO lore. His experience with these visitors was unlike anything previously reported, and he remained silent about the details for years. When Bender finally published his account in 1962 in the book Flying Saucers and the Three Men, he described entities far beyond ordinary intruders. These were not just men in black suits, but beings who could appear and vanish at will, accompanied by an unnatural cold and a distinctive odor. He claimed they revealed visions of their origin and reasons for secrecy. While skeptics dismissed his story as imagination, supporters pointed to significant changes in his behavior. His sudden shutdown, altered demeanor, and consistent private warnings predated his published account. The encounters were marked by an eerie precision. The men arrived unannounced, without names or identification. They did not argue, but simply instructed. When Bender complied, they disappeared completely. Over time, the Bridgeport case became a reference point in Men in Black research. Investigators noted shared elements in later accounts: black suits and unnatural room stillness, invasive knowledge of the witnesses' activities, and an unspoken pressure to abandon the subject. Bender ultimately married, moved away, and withdrew from public UFO research. The International Flying Saucer Bureau, EFSB, he had led, lasted just 2 years. Its abrupt end left a significant gap in early UFO community history. In subsequent decades, similar stories emerged. Witnesses described almost identical men appearing in pairs or threes with flat voices and predetermined questions. Some were instructed to destroy photographs, others to hand over debris, and many simply to forget. The men were more than mysterious visitors. They represented a consequence of the flying saucer phenomenon, returning unannounced, unshaken, and always knowing more than the witness. Their presence suggested a deeper, more complex narrative beneath the surface of UFO encounters. From Gray Barker's collected reports spanning the 1950s to 1960s in Clarksburg, West Virginia, these accounts painted a haunting picture of unexplained intervention. In 1953, Albert K. Bender closed down the International Flying Saucer Bureau, sending a quiet shockwave through the tight-knit UFO community. Ray Barker, a young writer from West Virginia, took particular notice. By day, he worked for a film distribution company, but by night, he delved deep into documenting what many considered America's most puzzling mystery, the flying saucer phenomenon. Though Barker had never met Bender in person, they had exchanged clippings and letters through the Bureau, sharing regional sighting accounts. When Bender suddenly went silent, Barker's investigative instincts kicked in. Combining the skills of a journalist and a puzzle solver, he began collecting notes, letters, and conducting interviews. A letter from one of Bender's old contacts provided Barker's first significant lead, suggesting Bender had been personally persuaded to stop his investigations. In late autumn of 1953, Barker traveled to Bridgeport, stepping off the train with the sharp salt air from Long Island Sound surrounding him. Their meeting took place in a hotel lobby, a neutral location Bender had specified. The dim light cast yellow circles across the carpet as Barker arrived early. When Bender appeared, he looked noticeably thinner than his photographs suggested, with shadowed eyes. Their conversation lasted less than 30 minutes. Bender spoke cryptically, using phrases like higher source and it's best to leave it alone that hinted at something beyond ordinary secrecy. Barker sensed Bender was holding back, with unspoken words hanging in the air between them. After they shook hands and parted, Barker headed toward the elevator. Halfway down the hallway, he realized he wasn't alone. A man stood ahead, his features blurred in the shadows. Initially mistaking him for another guest, Barker soon noticed the man's distinct appearance: a black suit, white shirt, narrow tie, and a hat in hand. The man remained silent at first, simply observing Barker before passing him as if carefully measuring the space between them. The hallway felt unnaturally quiet. No voices from other rooms, no sounds from the lobby. Even the light fixtures seemed to hum less distinctly. When the man finally spoke, his voice was flat and without a clear accent. His statement was direct and seemingly matter-of-fact. "You won't get what you're looking for." It wasn't a question or a threat, but a declaration that hung in the air with an unsettling certainty. In the late 1950s, Barker had become known in the UFO community not just as a collector of stories, but as someone who saw deeper patterns. His reputation grew from years of gathering reports about silent visitors and strange encounters that seemed to suggest something more was happening beneath the surface. A letter from Paul Henderson, a part-time radio technician in West Virginia, caught Barker's attention in 1961. Henderson described an unsettling incident following his report of a low-level disc sighting to a local newspaper. 2 men in black suits had appeared at his home, displaying an unnerving level of knowledge about his experience. They knew exactly when he'd gone outside, the direction he'd been facing, and that he'd taken a Polaroid photograph. When Barker arrived at Henderson's home, the yard was empty except for an old sedan. The road had wound through low hills, winter trees rattling in the wind. Inside, Henderson was visibly nervous, fidgeting with his wristwatch as he recounted the mysterious visit. The men had arrived just after sundown, stepping inside without invitation. They never introduced themselves. One briefly showed a card with lettering Henderson couldn't read before quickly hiding it. Strangely, they didn't ask for the photograph. Instead, they told Henderson he wouldn't find it worth keeping, claiming it would fade to nothing. When Henderson produced the photograph, Barker saw why. The image was pale and washed out, not from age, but as if the exposure itself had been drained. A faint circular outline hovered over the tree tine, the rest of the image nearly white. As Barker studied it, an unnatural silence filled the room. The only sound was the tick of the wall clock. This encounter was just one of many that had been accumulating in Barker's collection. Previous reports had consistently described not just meetings, but an underlying sense that someone else was controlling the conversation from the start. Strange men in black cars, asking too many questions, telling witnesses to forget what they'd seen. These experiences weren't isolated. Earlier, Barker had his own strange encounters. In one incident, a man had stepped into a corridor and vanished, leaving no trace. Back in his room, he found an envelope of meeting notes mysteriously unsealed, though he was certain he'd closed it earlier. Barker's work on UFO encounters revealed a consistent pattern. A sighting would occur, followed by a visit from mysterious observers. These encounters shared striking similarities across different locations and witnesses. Two figures sat in a black sedan at the edge of the drive, their faces turned toward the house. Henderson had gone pale when Barker recognized them. "That's them," he said quietly, gathering his notes and leaving after thanking Henderson. By the time Barker stepped outside, the car had vanished. Only the wind moved through the trees. The next morning, he discovered his filing cabinet's bottom drawer, where Henderson's original letter was kept, had been unlocked. He never left it that way. This confirmed the pattern. The sighting is reported. The visit follows. Witnesses withdraw. Evidence sometimes disappears or becomes meaningless. The visitors always left without names or credentials, but with a parting message more potent than any formal threat. For Barker, encounters in a hotel hallway and on a West Virginia back road showed Bender's experience wasn't unique. The same eerie stillness, compressed sound, pale faces, and flat voices appeared repeatedly. He believed these individuals knew too much about flying saucers. By the late 1960s, Barker understood he was more than an observer. He had been in the hallway, he had seen the car. Like others, he recognized the unspoken rule. Sightings are only part of the mystery. The visits that follow are what truly matter. On May 23, 1964, Jim Templeton, a fireman from Carlisle, took his wife Annie and young daughter Elizabeth to Berg Marsh near the Solway Firth. This quiet, open place became the site of an extraordinary photograph. Bringing his camera to capture family moments, he snapped 3 shots of Elizabeth sitting on the grass in a light blue dress. 2 photographs were ordinary, but the middle frame revealed a tall, white figure behind Elizabeth, bulky in the shoulders with a smooth, rounded head. Neither Jim nor Annie had seen anyone in the area. The marsh was empty, and anyone walking in would have been impossible to miss unnoticed. When the film was developed, the mysterious figure became visible, sparking decades of speculation and debate about its origin. Templeton's photograph of an unexplained figure in Berg Marsh caught everyone's attention. Local newspapers dubbed it the Solway FTH Spaceman, and soon national headlines followed. Friends recommended he take the evidence to authorities, but Kodak had already confirmed the exposure was single and untampered. 2 mysterious men arrived at the Carlisle fire station where Templeton worked. Tall, clean-shaven, wearing dark suits with white shirts and narrow ties, they spoke with an unidentifiable accent. They introduced themselves only as Number 9 and Number 11, claiming to be from some government department without specifying which one. Their demeanor was polite, yet strangely formal, almost rehearsed. They requested Templeton accompany them back to Berg Marsh. During the silent drive in a dark sedan, they asked only whether he still possessed the negatives, and if he had shown them to anyone. Once at the marsh, their questioning became more intricate. They probed details about weather conditions, wind direction, aircraft presence, and Templeton's exact location and positioning. Templeton reiterated his earlier statement to police. The afternoon had been calm and uneventful, with no one nearby and nothing unusual visible. The men listened impassively, repeatedly asking if he was certain he hadn't seen anyone. Their final provocative question inquired whether he believed the figure was connected to recent news. When Templeton expressed uncertainty, the man's tone shifted. They exchanged a brief glance, abruptly ended the questioning, and advised Templeton to forget the entire matter. They left as suddenly as they had arrived, driving away and leaving him standing alone on the marsh. The encounter haunted Templeton. Their refusal to identify themselves, their numeric references, and their suggestion to drop the investigation left him profoundly unsettled. Not after developing the photograph that would later spark intense discussion, Templeton found himself at the center of an unusual narrative. Reporters contacted him with strange claims about figures similar to the one in his image. An Australian journalist reported seeing helmet-wearing figures in white during a missile launch at Woomera, causing test delays. Though the reporter mentioned photographs, none ever surfaced. The timing intrigued Templeton. The Woomera incident supposedly occurred days after his photograph, but he could never verify the details. Government authorities, both Australian and British, remained silent, leaving any potential connection shrouded in mystery. Debate quickly emerged around the photograph. Skeptics suggested the figure might be Annie Templeton, a dress overexposed to appear white. However, supporters countered that the figure was taller and broader than Annie, with a helmet-like head and rigid stance that didn't match her proportions. Both Templeton and Annie maintained she had been yards away when the photo was taken. Over time, official interest didn't completely vanish. Months after his Marsh visit, men in suits approached Templeton at home. These investigators asked probing questions about his memories of that day, though in a less formal manner than previous encounters. They revealed little about their origins. Letters began arriving from people claiming similar experiences. Sightings of strange figures near military sites, often followed by questioning from unidentified individuals. By the 1970s, the photograph had gained wider recognition through books and television programs about unexplained phenomena. The mysterious men in dark suits became part of the narrative, drawing parallels with other accounts of witnesses reporting strange official encounters. Templeton increasingly wondered whether his experience might be part of a larger, more complex pattern of unexplained events. Now, when two unknown men, dressed formally and behaving with strict professionalism, questioned Jim Templeton about his strange photograph, he stuck to the facts as he experienced them. These men, who arrived unexpectedly, told Templeton to forget what he had seen. The encounter sparked widespread speculation about their potential identities. Some believed they were intelligence officers or private contractors working for defense agencies. The proximity of Bergmarsh to military testing ranges in the UK, coupled with mentions of sensitive details like Ra, suggested the interest was less about aliens and more about something accidentally captured, perhaps equipment, personnel, or a test that should have remained hidden. More paranormal-focused theorists saw these figures as part of a deliberate effort to suppress unexplained sightings. Templeton, however, maintained his integrity throughout. He never sold the negative, rejected payment offers for exclusive rights, and only allowed copies to be made for analysis. Decades later, the Soway case remained an intriguing intersection between photographic evidence and unexplained official interest. Analysts unanimously agreed the negative was genuine and untampered. Their disagreements centered on the figure's nature and the reason behind the mysterious visits. Key questions persisted. If the figure was human, who were they? If unrelated to earthly phenomena, why were Templeton and others instructed to forget the encounter? The case continued to occupy a gray area, neither fully debunked nor definitively proven. For those fascinated by photographic mysteries, it represented a rare instance of an image that survived technical scrutiny, while simultaneously drawing its photographer into contact with individuals whose identities and motivations remained obscure. More profoundly, it served as a reminder that the most compelling questions often arise not from the image itself, but from those who arrive afterwards seeking to control the narrative. The Soway photograph embodied this enigma, an enduring testament to the thin line between documentation and suppression, between what is seen and what is permitted to be remembered. Something started happening in the quiet rural area around a small town in November. Near the old munition storage grounds, north of town, known locally as the TNT area, a few people reported seeing a large, winged figure. While these initial sightings made the local paper, what followed left a more profound impact. The witnesses varied widely. Farmers, shopkeepers, young couples, and even a school teacher. Soon after sharing their stories, they began receiving unusual visits. Strangers would arrive unannounced, always dressed in dark suits, polite yet unsettling. They rarely offered their names, and their purpose remained mysteriously unclear. Mary Heyer, the Athens Messenger's Point Pleasant correspondent, became central to documenting these strange reports. Typically accustomed to writing about floods and county fairs, Her office soon filled with accounts of extraordinary encounters. Witnesses described shadows passing low over barn roofs, red lights drifting across the river, and strange figures by roadsides. She diligently took notes, wrote her columns, and filed the clippings. One early incident involved a farmer who had spoken with Hire about seeing a winged figure in his pasture at dusk. Days later, a black sedan drove up his long gravel lane. Two tall men in dark coats and hats asked to clarify details of his account. What unnerved him most wasn't their initial questions, but the sense they already knew the answers. The men's approach was methodical. They first repeated information he had shared with Mary Hire, then probed deeper. They asked if he had told anyone else about his experience, and whether he had written anything down. When he inquired about their identities, one simply smiled and said, "That's not important." The conversation concluded with a chilling remark he would never forget: "Things are less complicated if they're left alone." Another similar visit occurred with a woman who had reported strange lights moving over the Ohio River. Two men appeared at her door after dark, with a car idling in the street. She described them as polite but cold, as if their friendliness was a rehearsed performance. They asked precise questions about her location, viewing direction, and even requested she draw the light's path. Strangely, they never wrote anything down. Instead, they repeated her answers word for word. Most unsettling was their disappearance. When she looked outside moments after their departure, the street was empty, with no sound of a car driving away. No phone calls started at all. Silent lines would stay open, sometimes broken by an electronic beep, before disconnecting. Someone close to her had experienced something similar. One afternoon, a man walked into her office. He was short, with long black hair, a sallow complexion, and an oddly stiff posture. Without wasting time on introductions, he asked about the articles written on sightings, then abruptly switched to discussing city lights. He wanted details about their colors and regularity. After getting the information, he simply walked out. By January 1967, her desk drawers contained more than just sighting reports. She began collecting these accounts of unexpected visitors, filing them alongside creature and UFO sightings. Witnesses started sharing strange encounters. A teenage boy told her about a black sedan that pulled up outside his house. Two men in matching coats approached him, revealing details they shouldn't have known. They mentioned her dog's name, her sister's workplace, and her mother's birthday, not as questions but as confirmations. In town, similar incidents occurred. A hardware store owner who had mentioned seeing a figure on his roof was later visited by two men. They inquired about deliveries, trucks, and times without identifying themselves or making a purchase. Other encounters were subtler but equally strange. A shop assistant found her written statement about red lights missing from her home desk. A mechanic noticed a car parked near his garage for 3 consecutive nights, never moving during daylight. Their approach was consistent: official-sounding language, formal dress, controlled body movements. Some witnesses assumed they were government investigators. Others were uncertain. Local law enforcement quietly acknowledged these visits. A county deputy admitted that some of his own witnesses had been spoken to before he could investigate. "I don't know who they were," he told her, "but they weren't ours." Lasher State Trooper remembered a dark sedan with out-of-state plates, its engine running late one night near the TNT area, with no one visible inside. As time passed, these visits seemed less about gathering facts and more about controlling the narrative. Witnesses experienced subtle but unmistakable pressure to modify their accounts. Some were told directly that they were mistaken. One witness recalled the psychological impact: "I knew what I saw, but they just kept shaking their heads like I was a child." The encounters took a toll on those who spoke up. A young couple, among the first to report the winged figure, became so overwhelmed that they stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. Years later, the husband simply stated, "We didn't want to deal with it anymore." The social consequences were clear. People avoided discussing their experiences, fearing judgment or unwanted attention. A retired railroad worker who had initially provided a detailed description of a nighttime encounter eventually stopped talking, even with close friends. When asked why, he would simply say he didn't need the trouble. December 1967 marked an intensification of these interactions. Multiple witnesses reported being questioned repeatedly in the days leading up to the Silver Bridge collapse on the 15th, which killed 46 people in the freezing Ohio River. Some were asked peculiar questions about the bridge, its traffic, and crossing times with no clear explanation. After the bridge incident, the winged figure sightings ceased. Most visits stopped, though some witnesses received follow-up calls, inquiring about any unusual occurrences. Rather than bringing closure, this left many with lingering questions about why they had been singled out and by whom. Haya kept her files until her death in 1970. Researchers later found the sighting reports and visitor accounts intertwined, often sharing the same page. Over 13 months, Point Pleasant experienced not just a wave of aerial anomalies, but a calculated campaign of direct contact with those who spoke out. Speculation about the visitors' identity has persisted. Some believe they were federal agents operating in secrecy, though no agency has claimed responsibility. Others suggest they were private contractors from defense or intelligence organizations. More speculative theories propose they weren't connected to any known institution. What remains striking is the remarkable consistency across these accounts. Two men in black suits, pale faces, blank eyes. They arrive without a sound. After the photographs, after the evidence you thought was yours to keep. When they leave, what you captured no longer belongs to you. This was Rex Heflin's reality on an ordinary August afternoon in 1965 along Mifford Road in Santa Ana, California. A 38-year-old highway inspector, Heflin was accustomed to solitude, spending long hours documenting road hazards, erosion, and construction issues. That day, while checking radio equipment in his government truck, a flicker of motion in the sky caught his eye. Just beyond the railroad tracks, a disc-shaped object hovered silently, broad, metallic, and moving with strange deliberation against the pale California sky. Startled but not paralyzed, Heflin did what he had trained himself to do: document. With the steady hand of a man used to photographing accident sites, he reached for his ever-present Polaroid camera. He framed the object and clicked. The craft lingered, allowing him to take 3 photographs. In one frame, a smoky ring-like trail curled across the sky, as if the craft had expelled something into the air. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the object tilted on its edge, accelerated, and vanished. Later, Heflin would say he thought little beyond the act of photographing. He was a highway inspector, not a ufologist. But when the Polaroids developed, they showed something unambiguous: a structured disc with a domed center tilting against the California horizon. The story of these photographs would become part of Point Pleasant's legacy in Men in Black lore. Whether their goal was to gather data, discredit witnesses, or simply monitor the spread of certain stories, these mysterious visitors left behind a lingering feeling that someone was paying close attention. Roads, pairs of men in near-identical clothing, formal speech, precise questioning, no names offered, an air of knowing more than they said. For many who lived through such encounters, the real mystery was not what was seen in the sky, but the knock on the door afterward. When Jim Heflin took those photographs of the California Division of Highways, his colleagues had mixed reactions. Some laughed, others seemed concerned, but no one could deny the clarity of what he'd captured: something real, something airborne. The Santa Ana Register soon printed the images in black and white, and within days, the photographs spread nationally. There was something compelling about them. Taken in daylight by a government employee with a Polaroid camera, they seemed beyond simple manipulation. The public response was immediate. Letters arrived, phone calls came from curious readers and researchers. Suddenly, Heflin was at the center of one of the decade's most significant UFO sightings. But attention inevitably draws scrutiny. Days after publication, a phone call came to his office. A NORAD representative spoke with a mechanical tone, stating that the Air Force required the original Polaroids for analysis. His phrasing left little room for negotiation. Heflin felt something was off. The caller sounded rehearsed, as if reading from a script. Yet, trusting official channels, he agreed to hand over the images. This decision would lead to an even stranger encounter. Soon after, 2 men arrived at his office. Tall, dressed identically in black suits with white shirts and narrow ties, they stood with pale, fixed expressions and deliberate movements. No identification, no badges, just a direct statement: "We're here for the photographs." Their approach was unnerving. No request, no explanation, only absolute certainty. When Heflin asked about their affiliation, their response remained vague. Politely but firmly, they demanded the original photographs. Reluctantly, Heftlin retrieved the Polaroids from his desk. The men thanked him curtly, turned in perfect unison, and walked to a black sedan in the government vehicle lot. From his window, Heftlin watched them leave, noting they never checked in at the base's entry point. In the following days, the black sedan began appearing in unexpected places. The photographs were never returned. Heftlin's life became a landscape of constant vigilance after his UFO photographs. Dark, unmarked sedans would often sit parked near his home or office, always with two figures inside. His daughter recalled a pivotal moment when two men in suits knocked on their front door. Their questions were unnervingly precise. Had he taken additional photographs? Had he shared copies? Were negatives hidden somewhere in the house? When confronted, the men didn't argue or explain. They simply turned, walked in synchronized steps to their car, and drove away in complete silence. What terrified Heftlin wasn't their words, but their movement, mechanical and rehearsed beyond human nature. This encounter marked a psychological turning point. He began altering everything, circling blocks before returning home, drawing blinds at night, scanning the street before speaking. At work, the atmosphere shifted. Colleagues whispered about OSI agents asking questions about him. Warnings circulated not to pursue the matter further. Home dinners became tense affairs. His daughter remembered how he would pause mid-meal, staring out the window, always watching, always waiting. While Heftlin lived under this oppressive shadow, official narratives told a different story. NICAP researchers studied his surviving photographs, concluding they were single-exposure Polaroids of a structured object, not composites or hoaxes. They considered the images among the most compelling UFO evidence of the era. Yet the Air Force, through Project Blue Book, dismissed the case, suggesting the photos could be staged or misidentified. The contradiction was striking. If the photographs were truly worthless, why would NORAD and OSI operatives pursue them so aggressively? Why would Heflin's family endure silent surveillance? To those paying attention, the message was clear. Public dismissal masked quiet suppression. Heftlin himself wanted no part of notoriety. Notarex Heflin was an ordinary highway inspector whose life was profoundly altered by an extraordinary encounter. After witnessing something inexplicable in the sky, he became a changed man. Friends noticed how he withdrew from public discussions about his photographs, growing quieter and more guarded. His interactions became carefully measured. Before speaking, he would scan the street, always watchful. His words to a trusted confidant revealed a deep understanding. They just needed me to remember. This simple statement captured the essence of the Men in Black phenomenon, control through subtle intimidation, not violence, but through the constant pressure of being observed. Decades later, digital analysis of Heflin's surviving photographs provided intriguing insights. Experts found no evidence of trickery, concluding the Polaroid images appeared to be genuine single-exposure shots of a structured object. Yet, the original negatives mysteriously vanished. For researchers, these photographs represented more than just images of a disk in daylight. They embodied a recurring pattern. A witness captures something extraordinary. Official-looking men arrive, evidence disappears, and silence descends. The case left investigators wrestling with unsettling questions. Why would individuals claiming connections to NORAD and OSI go to such lengths to recover photographs the Air Force publicly dismissed as inconclusive? Why would Heflin's family endure silent surveillance if the incident was meaningless? These contradictions became integral to the narrative's enduring mystery. Heflin's story emerged as a stark example of how physical evidence and human testimony can be swallowed by an unseen machinery of suppression. The photographs were significant not just for what they revealed in the sky, but for the shadow that descended afterward, a shadow that reshaped his entire life. Today, Myford Road looks like any other stretch of Southern California asphalt. Commuters pass by, unaware of the extraordinary moment that once unfolded above this ordinary landscape. For Heflin, the true weight of his experience was never about the disc he photographed, but about the precise, nameless men who followed, moving like shadows in daylight, leaving no documents, no trace. The Rankins of New Jersey were not casual observers, but dedicated UFO researchers who had built an extensive network of information. Their home was a testament to their passion. Filing cabinets and folders crammed with letters, reports, and clippings occupied every corner of the living room and study. Ralph meticulously handled correspondence, while Judy directly engaged with witnesses. Together they represented a new breed of civilian researchers, filling the gap left by an official system that dismissed unexplained phenomena. In the spring of 1966, something changed. Their routine of sharing notes, comparing patterns, and supporting fellow researchers was disrupted by strange telephone disturbances. At first, it was subtle. Background noise, faint clicks interrupting conversations. Then came static bursts so loud that words disappeared entirely. When Ralph contacted the phone company, technicians found no explanation for the interference. What began as minor disturbances soon escalated. The Rankins found themselves transformed from investigators to subjects of investigation. Their extensive files and active research had apparently drawn unwelcome attention. By September, something had fundamentally shifted. The photographs they had collected spoke volumes, but their subsequent silence was perhaps more significant. The absence of documentation and the eerie quiet that followed became a stark reminder of how easily evidence can vanish and how quietly a life can be reshaped by unseen forces. Ralph and Judy Rankin were no longer just researchers. They had become part of the mystery they had long sought to understand. Ralph and Judy Rankin, both researchers, began experiencing strange occurrences that hinted at something more sinister. It started with a chilling phone call Judy received one evening. The voice on the line repeated her previous conversations verbatim, as if playing back a recording. When she attempted to identify the caller, the line went dead. Soon after, Ralph noticed unfamiliar vehicles lingering near their home. A black sedan with tinted windows appeared multiple times, strategically parked just far enough away to seem random, but never staying long enough for Ralph to investigate. Their attempts to joke about being monitored masked an underlying anxiety. They were researchers, not whistleblowers, yet someone was clearly sending a message that they were being watched. Late one afternoon, a knock interrupted their routine. Ralph opened the door to find two men in dark suits, white shirts, and narrow ties. Their pale complexions and unnaturally fixed stares immediately set them on edge. "We understand you've been collecting information," one man stated flatly. They requested to enter the house. The Rankins, unsettled but maintaining politeness, welcomed them inside. The visitors methodically surveyed the living room, scanning walls, cabinets, and neatly stacked folders. Their interrogation began immediately. Where did they obtain their files? Who were their sources? Did they know witness names? Were there photographs, negatives, or recordings? Judy remembered their expressions as completely unchanging. Their lips moved, but their faces remained mask-like, devoid of emotion. When she offered tea, they acted as if she hadn't spoken. What truly unsettled the Rankins was the visitors' extensive knowledge. They referenced details never published, names of correspondents and case descriptions shared only in private letters. When Ralph questioned how they knew such specifics, their response was chillingly simple: "We have our ways." For nearly an hour, the men asked questions, listened intently, and occasionally wrote notes in small black pads. Upon leaving, they offered no credentials or explanations. They thanked the Rankins in unison and departed. From the window, Ralph watched them enter the same dark sedan. The car pulled away silently, without headlights, dissolving into the suburban streets. The Rankins stood in their quiet living room, surrounded by their meticulously organized work, experiencing an unsettling sense that something fundamental had changed. Not their home had been subtly examined. Papers appeared, shifted, drawers stood slightly ajar, as if carefully inspected. Nothing was taken, yet everything felt violated. That evening, Judy expressed her growing unease. The earlier knock had seemed ordinary, but what followed was anything but normal. Men arrived with an official demeanor, yet presented no credentials. Their questioning cut directly to the core of the Rankins' research, immediately stripping away the house's sense of safety and comfort. Phone disruptions became a constant concern. Judy frequently answered calls only to encounter unsettling silence or faint echoes of her own words, repeated back to her. Ralph began suspecting their communications were being monitored, perhaps with letters copied before reaching their destination. What began as passionate research into UFO phenomena had transformed into a source of deep anxiety. The Rankins had initially hoped to contribute meaningful insights to the field, but now their work felt dangerous. In subsequent months, they systematically withdrew from all UFO-related activities, meetings, correspondence, reports to NICAP. all ceased completely. When pressed about their sudden retreat, they offered only vague explanations. "We've experienced some pressure," or "it's best we step back," became their standard responses. To those who knew them, the transformation was dramatic. Once enthusiastic researchers, they now avoided the subject entirely. Judy's fear became intensely personal. Being alone in the house, every slowly passing car heightened her tension. Each phone ring carried a sense of impending dread. Ralph's burden felt even heavier. He believed he had not only failed himself, but also the broader community of researchers who depended on mutual trust and openness. Their self-imposed silence matched exactly what their mysterious visitors seemed to desire. Quietly, word of their experience spread through UFO research circles. NICAP eventually documented their encounter as a quintessential example of men in black intervention targeting researchers rather than witnesses. To those who read their account, the implications were deeply unsettling. The phenomenon extended far beyond observing strange craft in the sky. It reached into personal spaces, across telephone lines, through correspondence, and directly into one's home. Ralph and Judy had sought only truth, not fame. Yet their passionate research had attracted the attention of unnamed, intimidating forces, transforming their work from a pursuit of knowledge into a source of profound fear. A quiet turning point marked the end of Ralph and Judy Rankin's work in UFO research. Their once vibrant discussions about unexplained phenomena had faded into silence, their conversations becoming more cautious and restrained. Judy would often gaze out windows during discussions, her demeanor suggesting a growing unease. Their decision to withdraw wasn't sudden or casual. It reflected a deeper understanding that continued investigation might invite unwelcome attention and escalate their fears. The Rankin case illuminated a broader dimension of the Men in Black phenomenon, one that went beyond casual witnesses to target those actively seeking truth. This wasn't about physical suppression of evidence, like removing photographs or negatives. Instead, it was psychological intimidation aimed at researchers who were building networks of inquiry. The resulting silence spread, cutting communication lines and weakening the research community. For NYAP, their account became an archive entry, a cautionary tale about the risks faced by ordinary people who venture into areas of secrecy. Their house, now owned by unaware new residents, once harbored intense investigations and mysterious encounters. The pale-faced visitors who crossed their threshold represented more than just two men in suits. They symbolized a deeper mechanism of control. It wasn't only those who witnessed strange events who were silenced, but those who actively seek understanding. Files can vanish, photographs can be lost, but when investigators themselves become afraid, the resulting silence is profound and complete. Today, the Rankins are barely remembered outside UFO research circles, yet their story transcends a simple encounter. It speaks to the fragility of inquiry and how easily a passionate search for truth can be transformed into a reason for silence. The encounter embodied a stark warning. Curiosity can come with unexpected consequences, and some questions are better left unasked. A 29-year-old office secretary on Indianapolis's East Side, her world revolved around work, church, and family. By all accounts, she was practical and deeply connected to her community. A UFO encounter was unexpected and brief. One July evening while driving home, she spotted a disc-shaped craft hovering above a field. The brilliant light initially seemed like a helicopter, but as she slowed her car, she realized it was something different. Within a minute or two, the craft shot upward and vanished, leaving her startled. The next day, she mentioned the sighting to a co-worker who was familiar with UFO research. Encouraged to document her experience, she cautiously gave a short phone interview. She thought that would be the end of it. But then the men arrived. Two strangers appeared at her door, introducing themselves without names. They claimed to be investigators but offered no identification. Their presence was unnerving. They knew intimate details she hadn't shared publicly. The exact date, the road she'd been driving, even what she'd told her co-worker. Their questioning felt less like curiosity and more like verification. They asked pointed questions. How long had she stopped her car? Had she taken photographs? Had she spoken to anyone besides her co-worker? Did she still plan to contact the UFO group? Each query suggested they already knew the answers. One man carried a small notepad but never wrote anything down. The other sat rigidly, staring at her unblinkingly. Sheila carried the weight of their authority. They crossed her threshold as if invited, their movements deliberate and oppressive. In that moment, she understood the true threat wasn't what she had seen in the sky weeks earlier, but who had now come to erase her experience. Her story didn't emerge from a desire for publicity, but because friends and family noticed the change in her. She reluctantly shared her account with MUFON field investigators who documented her testimony. Speech felt mechanical, as though rehearsed. It was like listening to a recording, she said. Her world changed after the strange encounter. 2 weeks before discovering her living room disturbed, Sheila experienced unsettling events. Neighbors noticed her personality shifting. Once friendly and talkative, she became subdued, her smile vanishing quickly, her answers growing shorter. When she hesitated during their conversation, the men's tone shifted. They advised her firmly not to continue with the UFO group. It would be better, one said, if you forgot what you saw. Their words weren't shouted or overtly threatening, but their weight was unmistakable. After several minutes, they rose abruptly. Without shaking hands or offering thanks, they walked to their black sedan and pulled away, the car moving too quietly for its size. Sheila stood at the window, shaken until the taillights vanished. For the next several days, she couldn't shake the sense of being watched. A car would idle down the street, dark and unmarked, with 2 figures sitting inside. At first she tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but the car appeared too often at different hours, always disappearing the moment she considered approaching it. Her phone line began clicking and popping during conversations. Once she picked up to hear a faint echo of her own voice repeating, as if another line were listening. When she mentioned this to a co-worker, the woman laughed nervously. Maybe the government doesn't want you talking about your flying saucer. The remark was meant as a joke, but it only deepened Sheila's unease. At home, she moved curtains carefully, checking the street before opening the front door. Evening walks stopped entirely. Worried the sedan might follow her, 2 weeks after their visit, she returned home to find her living room subtly altered. A lamp had been moved, papers on her desk were out of order, nothing valuable was stolen, no money, no jewelry, but her notebook detailing the sighting was gone. Telling a close friend, her voice shook. "They came back when I wasn't here," she said. "I don't know how, but they came back." The pressure wore her down quickly. She stopped discussing the sighting altogether. To her family, she claimed she had said too much, and it was best to drop the subject. When her sister pressed, Sheila's face tightened. "You don't understand," she said. "It's not safe." Fear manifested in small ways. She unplugged her phone at night, constantly vigilant. She stopped answering door knocks unless she recognized the visitor. Her friends noticed a stark change in her behavior. Something seemed to be weighing on her, as if she expected an unexpected event at any moment. When MUFON investigators followed up, they found her reluctant to fully cooperate. She confirmed basic details of her sighting but became visibly anxious when asked about a specific visit. She admitted 2 men had arrived and delivered a warning, but would say little more. "They told me not to talk," she whispered. "I shouldn't even be saying this." The silence crept into her work life. Co-workers observed her withdrawal. She stopped casual conversations, skipped group lunches, and often stared out windows, seemingly lost in thought. One colleague remembered her saying quietly, "It's not the light I'm afraid of, it's the men." Researchers were particularly troubled by the men's specific knowledge. They referenced details only her co-worker and the MUFON investigator knew. They mentioned her intention to continue with the UFO group, despite her never discussing this outside a single phone call. Local police unequivocally denied sending any officers to her home. They insisted they had no reason to interfere with her report. If not the police, then who? The men carried themselves with official confidence, but no agency claimed them. Their warning was firm, yet their presence left no trace. For Sheila, this contradiction was unbearable. She desperately wanted to believe she could turn to someone for protection, some agency that would explain what happened. Instead, she found only denial and silence. The absence of explanation became its own answer. Her case never became a headline. It didn't appear in newspapers or draw national television attention like earlier UFO encounters, yet among researchers, her experience became a quiet reference point, illustrating how men in black activities had shifted by the late 1970s. Unlike the high-profile cases of the 1950s and 60s, which involved seized photographs and physical evidence, Franklin's ordeal highlighted a different approach. silencing ordinary witnesses who dared share what they saw. She had no photographs, no debris fragments, no dramatic abduction story to headline. Her testimony was all she had, but it was enough to draw the attention of men determined to silence her. The fear outlasted the initial sighting, with friends noting how she avoided discussing the experience for the rest of her life. When approached by researchers, she would only confirm that she had been told to forget. The weight of that instruction pressed down on her, making silence seem the only safe option. MUF investigators found her case deeply troubling. They observed her rapid withdrawal and visible transformation after the visit, unable to explain the men's precise knowledge or their ability to enter her life with such certainty. What they documented was less about her story and more about its impact. Fear, withdrawal, a constant sense of being watched. She had transformed from an open, curious person to someone reduced to whispers, the light in the sky becoming less significant than the men who followed it. Today, her street in Indianapolis looks like any other. Houses line the block, children play on sidewalks, cars come and go. Nothing marks the place where two men once entered uninvited, where a black sedan idled at the corner with dimmed headlights and an unexplained presence. But Sheila's memory endured. She remembered the pale faces, the flat voices that spoke her name as if they had always known her. She recalled the warning to stay silent, delivered without threat, yet heavy enough to settle into her bones. Most haunting was the sense that they already knew everything she had tried to keep private. The Franklin case doesn't rely on photographs or recordings. It rests on the testimony of a woman with no reason to invent her fear. It reveals a pattern running through decades of men in black encounters. Evidence vanishes, witnesses retreat, and silence replaces testimony. For researchers, it demonstrates that the phenomenon was not limited to early UFO investigations or prominent figures. It reached into the lives of ordinary people, reminding them that what they saw was not theirs to keep. For those studying the men in black, it offers yet another unsolved puzzle. Now, were they visitors truly government agents or something that only wore the shape of men? Their impact was undeniable, though they left no record, no trace. In the end, Sheila Franklin's legacy is silence. Dan Sherman's story begins in mid-1970s Illinois, USA. With a UFO sighting that would change everything, he'd reported a glowing object moving low across the street line, hovering longer than any aircraft should. A momentary encounter he expected to forget. The event that started it all was brief. Sherman was returning home late one evening when a luminous object passed over the road ahead. Oval, silent, glowing pale blue-white. It moved steadily above the tree line before tilting and fading into clouds. He reported it casually to local authorities and a regional UFO group. No photographs, no physical traces, just his testimony. It should have ended there. Another UFO report among many filling Midwestern newspapers with stories of lights over farms and highways. But for Sherman, the sighting didn't fade into memory. It became the trigger for something far more unsettling. Within weeks, he noticed the car, a dark sedan parked at the end of his street, engine running. Two men seated in the front. They never left the vehicle, never knocked on his door, never acknowledged his presence. But their eyes followed him. At first he dismissed it as coincidence, but when it appeared 3 nights in a row, then again a week later, always in the same spot, always when he returned home, the coincidence began to feel like design. This was no single interview or demand for evidence. This was the slow erosion of normal life, carried out by men who never spoke, but whose presence said everything. Men with blank faces, flat voices, whose presence lingered long after they had gone. She saw something in the sky. She told the truth about it. Then the knock came. The men entered, and the silence spread. It was not the light that changed her life, but the men who came after. The strange pattern became impossible to ignore. A car kept appearing at unusual times, late at night when the street was completely quiet, and early in the morning when people were leaving for work. Sherman noticed something off about the men inside. When they were near, their faces looked unnaturally pale and their movements seemed mechanical. Once, one turned his head slowly and stared directly at Sherman without any emotion. This unsettling encounter prompted Sherman to start documenting everything. He began tracking dates in a notebook and sketching the car's license plate, which seemed to change mysteriously, sometimes showing out-of-state tags, sometimes showing no plate at all. Small disturbances started happening inside his home. Drawers would be slightly open. Chairs would shift a few inches. Papers on his desk would be subtly rearranged. Nothing was ever stolen, but everything felt slightly out of place, as if someone had carefully examined his belongings. His phone began acting strangely too. Calls would be interrupted by static. Sometimes when he picked up, he'd hear only silence followed by a disconnection. Sherman replaced his locks and had the phone line checked, but no explanation emerged. The car continued to return, its occupants waiting silently. Over time, Sherman became convinced these weren't ordinary men. Their posture was unnaturally rigid, their movements too synchronized. Once, he saw them both turn their heads in perfect unison, their pale faces illuminated by dashboard light. Neighbors started noticing too. Some remarked about the car parked motionless for hours. Others described the men as sitting completely still, like statues. When Sherman suggested involving the police, neighbors seemed reluctant. "If they're from the government," one said, "we'd only cause trouble." Sherman tried reporting it himself. A patrol car drove past the sedan, slowed down, glanced over, and then continued without stopping. The vehicle remained untouched, seemingly beyond normal investigation. One day, Sherman decided to approach the car directly. He walked slowly, watching for any reaction. The men remained motionless. Only when he was just 20 feet away did the sedan suddenly start and drive off, its acceleration smooth and deliberate, neither rushed nor fearful. Nor Sherman's life changed dramatically after an encounter that seemed to trigger a decision to leave. Once outgoing, he grew withdrawn, with friends noticing his transformation. Sleep became shallow, interrupted by imagined sounds and constant vigilance. Paranoia bled into his daily existence. He stopped reporting unusual sightings, believing his experience wasn't worth investigating. His family felt the strain intensely. His sister remembered phone calls where he whispered, as if someone might be listening. A cousin noted how he avoided holiday gatherings, fearful of leaving his house empty. The beings in the car had never spoken or entered his home, yet their silent presence was enough to unravel his trust in ordinary life. Sherman began altering his routines, circling blocks before turning into streets and leaving lights on in every room at night. His case emerged during a peculiar moment in UFO investigation history. Project Blue Book had closed in December 1969, leaving the Air Force without a formal public program. However, interest hadn't vanished. The Office of Special Investigations remained active, interviewing witnesses in sensitive cases. Regional UFO groups documented his testimony, noting details about the mysterious car and home disturbances. Some suggested FBI involvement, knowing that surveillance of UFO witnesses wasn't unprecedented in the 1950s and 60s, yet the behavior didn't match standard procedures. Instead, the pattern resembled the infamous Men in Black, visitors who communicated through presence rather than words. Sherman attempted to verify the surveillance through official channels, contacting a local police captain he knew. The captain dismissed his concerns, claiming no records matched his description. When Sherman pressed further about potential outside involvement, he was met with continued dismissal. The silent, unexplained surveillance had fundamentally altered his perception of safety and normalcy. By the second year, Sherman felt he was living under glass. His world had shrunk to a place of constant uncertainty and unease. Trust evaporated from his life. He no longer felt secure with his locks, his phone, or even his daily routine. Neighbors became potential threats. He stopped sharing anything with them, suspecting every conversation might be monitored. His notes about his experiences grew increasingly chaotic, filled with frantic sketches of cars that seemed to materialize and vanish without explanation. Strange incidents accumulated. He'd return home to find his radio tuned to an unfamiliar frequency. Another time, he discovered his back door ajar, despite being certain he had locked it. Nothing was ever taken, but the message was clear. His home was no longer entirely his own. The silence of the men who watched him was the most unnerving part. They never confronted him directly or asked questions. Their presence was a psychological weapon designed to erode his sense of control. Sherman began doubting his own perceptions. Had he really locked that door? Had that chair been moved? Reality blurred into a landscape of manipulation. Eventually, he withdrew completely from UFO discussions. He stopped attending meetings, answering letters, and even acknowledging the subject to close friends. His silence wasn't about disbelief, but survival. "They want me quiet," he told a correspondent before cutting off contact. And so he became quiet. Over time, their visits grew less frequent. The mysterious car appeared only occasionally, then vanished altogether. Sherman's reputation as a witness faded, his case becoming just another file in researchers' archives. This remained one of the clearest examples of silent intimidation. Unlike other cases with direct confrontations or explicit threats, this was subtler, a slow, calculated erosion of personal security. A car parked outside, objects mysteriously displaced, phone lines that communicated more through their silence than any words. For researchers, it echoed similar surveillance cases, the Robinson family in Maine, the Rankins in New Jersey, where the boundary between government interests and something more unexplained seemed to dissolve. For Sherman, it was simpler. He had seen something unusual in the sky, reported it, and spent years feeling watched. And although his life seemed encased like an exhibit, Sherman's experience defied simple explanation. The aftermath mattered more than the initial sighting. Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, during October 1973, became a hotspot of extraordinary encounters. The UFO wave swept through hills and valleys, leaving an indelible mark on those who witnessed it. Dozens of reports came flooding in from farmers, police officers, and entire families who saw something inexplicable. Strange disks and luminous spheres glided low over fields. Light beams reached down through tree lines. Some witnesses even described encounters with bizarre figures, moving with an unnatural gait. But beyond the visual spectacle lay something more insidious. The men who arrived afterward. These visitors came with a deliberate, sharp knock that felt rehearsed. They stood behind doors in dark suits, introducing themselves with vague authority. Their questions cut deeper than casual conversation. Families who had seen strange lights, hunters who watched luminous objects drift through trees, and police officers who pursued glowing craft all encountered these mysterious men. The visitors spoke with flat voices and mechanical expressions. They carried no identification, only an unsettling certainty. When they departed, silence was their calling card. Stan Gordon, a young investigator from Greensburg, worked tirelessly to document these events. Sherman's story, like many others, became part of a larger pattern of men in black encounters. The lights would vanish quickly, but the silence remained. The Illinois streets where Sherman once lived are now quiet, indistinguishable from any other Midwestern neighborhood. No trace remains of the dark sedan that once idled at the corner. No record exists of the men who sat inside. Yet for Sherman, the memory never faded. His experience revealed the power of presence without explanation. Silence itself became a weapon. The visits reshaped his life until saying nothing felt safer than speaking. A strange phenomenon was sweeping through Pennsylvania. People were reporting unidentified flying objects with increasing frequency, and documentation was becoming extensive. Stan Gordon was collecting evidence meticulously. His phone continuously rang with new sightings, and he filled notebooks with witness statements. County maps were marked with pins, and landing sites were photographed, showing scorched or flattened grass. Local newspapers published stories of glowing craft seen simultaneously by multiple witnesses. Police dispatchers logged calls about objects moving at impossible speeds, too fast for helicopters and too low for conventional aircraft. Farmers and families shared remarkable encounters. One described a disc hovering over his pasture, sending beams of light through fog and startling cattle. Another family watched a glowing object silently crossing Route 30, illuminating their car's interior. State troopers even joined pursuits, chasing these unidentified objects down winding roads, only to see them shoot skyward and disappear. Soon, after these reports reached the press, something more unsettling emerged. Mysterious visitors. Witnesses began reporting strange encounters. Men in dark suits would appear, asking precise, unnerving questions. They seemed to know details before witnesses shared them. A farmer who witnessed a glowing disc above his barn was visited by two men claiming to be officials, though they never specified their origin. They asked detailed questions about the object's appearance, number of witnesses, and whether photographs were taken. When the farmer hesitated, one man leaned in and said chillingly, "We already know more than you've told anyone." Similar experiences occurred with other witnesses. A family who saw a luminous sphere over a cornfield was warned against speaking to reporters. A retired steelworker who reported lights above a quarry was visited by men claiming to represent the Air Force, intensely focused on whether he had taken photographs. Strangely, when some witnesses later attempted to verify these visits through official channels, they were told no such investigators had been sent. The visitors never showed badges or carried identification, adding to the mystery surrounding these encounters. An air of authority carried intimidation, leaving families fearful and subdued. Witnesses described something eerie about men who arrived. Their behavior stood out as unnatural. Speech came across as robotic, devoid of emotion, almost as if recited from a memorized text. Bodies moved mechanically, faces blank and lifeless. One witness told Gordon how men seemed to be struggling a grasp language in real time. A local police officer who had pursued a glowing object encountered a peculiar follow-up. Days after his chase, a man claiming Air Force affiliation approached him. When asked for credentials, he deflected, instead demanding detailed information about citing, "We don't show papers," he declared. "We ask questions." Unnerved, the officer later verified his encounter. He discovered no record of such a person at the local Air Force base. No official had been sent to interview him. Local families noticed strange inconsistencies. Mysterious visitors displayed a fundamental unfamiliarity with rural life. They mispronounced local place names and asked naive questions about roads everyone knew well. These errors suggested were outsiders, perhaps even who claimed OB. A clear pattern emerged over following weeks. Witnesses who had initially been open grew reticent. Farmers retracted air statements. Families who had described strange lights now refused further questioning. Stan Gordon observed his network changing. Phone calls, however once welcoming, now ended abruptly. Scheduled meetings cancelled without explanation. Some witnesses wouldn't even answer air doors. One woman who reported a glowing object near her property contacted Gordon in distress. Mysterious men had visited, asking invasive questions, just about citing boo her entire life, her family, her children, her daily routines, while no overtly threatening knowledge felt deeply unsettling. "I felt like already knew everything," she said, and Hen fell silent. Another witness who had previously shown Gordon scorched ground from an alleged UFO landing suddenly changed his story. He claimed mark was from a brush fire, contradicting his earlier detailed account. Gordon believed he had been pressured or modify his narrative. Officially, his record remained conspicuously blank. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's investigative program, offered no substantive explanation. Budgets had dwindled, investigators were few, and the official stance leaned heavily toward closure. The 1969 Condon Report had provided the justification: UFOs posed no threat to national security and warranted no further investigation. Yet sightings continued, particularly in Pennsylvania, where they came in a flood. Witnesses reported encounters with men claiming to be from the Air Force, but something seemed off. The described behavior didn't align with standard OSI procedures. Typically, Air Force Office of Special Investigations agents would show credentials, document interviews, and file detailed reports. In contrast, the visitors in Westmoreland left no trace, no identification, no paperwork, no record. Stan Gordon reached out to military contacts, only to be told no official teams had been sent to the county. Local police quietly acknowledged seeing outsiders asking questions, men who didn't coordinate with law enforcement and disappeared as quickly as they arrived. Some researchers speculated that NORAD might have been aware of these sightings. Radar operators along the East Coast had logged unusual returns that season, unidentified objects performing maneuvers inconsistent with known aircraft. Internal memos would later reveal that NORAD continued sharing information with the Air Force, even as Blue Book wound down. Yet no official acknowledgement ever reached the witnesses themselves. The result was a thick fog of uncertainty. Were these visitors connected to official channels, OSI agents, Air Force intelligence, or NORAD liaisons? Or were they something else entirely, mimicking authority but answering to no one? For Stan Gordon and the witnesses, this lack of clarity became a form of psychological intimidation. They could no longer distinguish between legitimate inquiry and whatever force was moving quietly through the Pennsylvania hills. The impact was profound, and immediate. Witnesses who had once been open became guarded. Farmers stopped answering phones. Families drew curtains even during daylight. Children grew anxious at the sight of unfamiliar cars. A young couple who had reported a luminous craft over a ridge near their farm eventually told Gordon they had stopped answering the phone entirely, paralyzed by fear of another anonymous voice. Partista, a state trooper, admitted off record that he had been warned not to stick his neck out about the chase he had given a glowing object, advice that convinced him to keep silent. Westmoreland County experienced a deep transformation. The UFO wave of 1973 wasn't just about extraordinary sightings, but about the silence that followed. Stan Gordon later reflected that the hardest part was not the number of incidents, but the number of voices suppressed. Communities became paralyzed by paranoia. People felt watched and managed, their accounts systematically erased through intimidation. Witnesses who could have provided crucial testimony instead retreated into fear, leaving critical details unrecorded. This regional UFO event became significant not just for the lights reported across Pennsylvania's hills, but for what happened afterward. Men in Black activity demonstrated a powerful ability to suppress information. By their quiet interventions, they could erase experiences more effectively than any official denial. Dozens might witness extraordinary events, but a few quiet visitors could make those accounts vanish. Gordon learned how fragile testimony could be. Entire narratives could disappear without a trace. In 1973, Westmoreland County carried two mysteries. Silent, glowing discs moved through night skies, while pale-suited strangers walked between farmhouses, asking precise questions. Their visits left behind an unsettling quiet that outlasted the lights themselves. Similar encounters occurred in Scandinavia during the 1950s and 60s. Norwegian and Swedish witnesses reported visitors who seemed official but felt fundamentally wrong. Their questions were methodical, their accents slightly off. Men in dark coats with inexplicable paperwork would arrive wherever strange lights had been seen, then depart, leaving only doubt and unease. Today, the hills look unchanged, dotted with farms and back roads, but the silence from 1973 still echoes. The decades after World War II saw a remarkable spike in UFO reports across Scandinavia. In this region, historically known for its institutional trust, unexplained aerial phenomena were not uncommon. From late 1940s ghost rockets streaking through skies to disc and sphere sightings in rural villages, Norway and Sweden became focal points for these mysterious encounters. Northern military bases like Bodø tracked objects hovering low over fjords. Researchers and journalists were drawn to these accounts, documenting testimonies from ordinary citizens, farmers and fishermen who offered compelling narratives. Some even collected physical evidence. Metallic fragments, scorched grass patches that hinted at something extraordinary. Near Trondheim, a farmer described a disc-shaped object landing briefly in his field. He recalled a glowing rim and a humming vibration that shook the ground. Days later, two men arrived at his home, claiming to be police. Their clothing was dark, their manner abrupt, and their Norwegian speech slightly awkward. When the farmer requested identification, one produced a document with an unfamiliar seal. The paperwork looked suspicious, the agency name misspelled, the typeface uneven. When pressed for details, the men deflected, emphasizing the confidentiality of their work. Their questioning focused intently on whether anything had been taken from the landing site. The farmer, who had secretly pocketed a small metal shard, denied having collected anything. The men exchanged a knowing glance, nodded stiffly, and departed. Weeks later, the fragment mysteriously vanished from a locked drawer. A similar encounter occurred in Sweden. A fisherman near Umeå reported a luminous craft hovering over a lake. Two officials claiming to represent a technical ministry, which Sweden did not actually possess, visited him. Their interrogation followed an identical pattern. Precise questions about time, distance, and potential evidence. As more reports accumulated, the peculiar nature of these visits became increasingly apparent, revealing a pattern of mysterious interventions that defied straightforward explanation. Two men in long coats and hats approached, their politeness masking an unsettling intensity. The wife noticed something unnatural. Their faces seemed devoid of emotion, almost blank. Similar strange interactions emerged across different accounts. A Swedish schoolteacher who had collected students' drawings of a disc-shaped object was visited by men whose behavior felt distinctly off. Their conversation seemed mechanical, pausing at odd moments and resuming mid-sentence like actors reciting rehearsed lines. When the teacher tried interrupting, they simply continued, entirely disregarding his attempts. In northern Norway, a fisherman discovered similar oddities during his encounter. The men questioning him appeared bewildered by basic local information. They inquired about the nearest train station in a village that had never had one. This disconnect revealed more about their foreignness than their awkward speech. Witnesses consistently reported identical peculiarities: stiff postures, lifeless mannerisms, and documents that looked impressive only at first glance. These encounters profoundly affected those involved. The Trondheim farmer who had originally shared his story now refused to discuss it, cryptically stating, "It is not wise to talk." Similarly, the Umeå fisherman began avoiding the lake where he had seen the mysterious craft. Families corroborated these strange follow-up experiences. Some recalled black cars parked near their homes for hours, with occupants who would only drive away when approached. The Swedish couple, after losing scorched vegetation on their property, avoided all media contact. Their children later revealed they had been instructed never to discuss the men who visited. The school teacher who had collected the students' drawings locked them away, telling colleagues only that there are things we are not meant to keep. Repeatedly, it was not the initial sighting that silenced people, but the subsequent visit. When witnesses sought official confirmation, they encountered only silence. Not a Swedish constable privately revealed to a researcher that he had received 3 or 4 similar complaints in his district. People reported being visited by men in suits after UFO sightings, always with the same style of questioning, always vanishing afterward. The constable was deeply troubled. "If they are not ours," he confided, "then whose are they?" In Trondheim, a farmer brought a strange document to the local police station. Officers studied it briefly before dismissing it as a forgery, noting the misspelling of the agency's name and poor print quality. They insisted no investigators had been dispatched and no one in the department recognized the signatures at the bottom. The Umeå fisherman inquired about the so-called technical ministry. Local officials assured him no such department existed and suggested the men were pranksters. He rejected this idea. "Pranksters don't know the time I went to bed," he told them, recalling how the visitors had asked about the precise hour he retired for the night. These denials from police left witnesses more unsettled. They trusted their institutions, but their institutions refused ownership of the encounters. What remained was uncertainty and the suspicion that they had been touched by something operating outside official channels. The visits weighed heavily on those who experienced them. A Norwegian farmer described the encounter as suffocating, saying he felt the air itself had been taken from the room. A fisherman avoided his own boat for months, not because of the UFO, but because of the fear the men would return. A Swedish teacher told researchers that speaking to the visitors was like talking to a photograph. Their presence was real but hollow, their responses automatic. Physical symptoms followed for some: dizziness, fatigue, headaches. Others simply withdrew from social life. One woman instructed her daughter never to repeat the family sighting outside the home, warning her that the men come back when you talk. In small towns and villages, ridicule already kept many silent. The visits added a heavier feeling that not only neighbors, but powerful strangers wanted them quiet. The Scandinavian MIB reports remain among the earliest and clearest European examples of the phenomenon. They showed that whatever force lay behind these encounters was not confined to one country. The encounter with the unknown unfolded with a chilling, repetitive precision. In the summer of 1967, a Canadian family near Niagara Falls experienced something that would forever alter their perception of reality. What began as a quiet evening walk by the rushing waters turned extraordinary when strange lights appeared overhead. The family, witnessing something inexplicable, kept their experience close, sharing it with almost no one. But silence would not protect them. Days later, men arrived at their door, strangers who seemed to know impossible details about that night. These visitors moved with an unsettling artificiality, their humanity somehow incomplete. Their papers seemed mismatched, their voices awkward, their movements strangely mechanical. This pattern was not unique. Across Scandinavia's farms and fjords, similar encounters left witnesses with a profound sense of unease. Sightings would be reported, witnesses questioned, evidence systematically erased or diminished. The mysterious lights themselves left no permanent trace, but the men who followed ensured that any remaining evidence was neutralized. For researchers, the lights in the sky were merely the surface of a deeper mystery. The real story unfolded in quiet living rooms, where ordinary people confronted strangers who wore authority without truly embodying it. These encounters left an indelible mark on those who experienced them. Today, the ghost rockets of the 1940s are remembered as Cold War curiosities, the discs and lights of the 1950s and 60s as unexplained mysteries. But for those who opened their doors to these strange visitors, the experience was far more personal and disturbing. What remained was a haunting memory, not of dramatic spacecraft, but of something far more unsettling. Men who seemed to wear human shape, but were fundamentally different. And above all, the silence that followed, heavy, deliberate, and enduring. This particular case stands as one of the few documented Men in Black encounters in Canada, a chilling reminder that such phenomena recognize no borders. The family's brief encounter with the unknown did not end at the river's edge, but followed them home, carried not by the lights they witnessed, but by the pale, strange men who came afterward. They were lights unlike anything they'd seen before. Bright, spherical objects moved in ways no plane or helicopter could. The father remembered how the lights shifted suddenly, darting across the sky and then holding perfectly still. His children pointed, wondering if these were fireworks or stars. But fireworks don't hang motionless, and stars don't descend and glow through the mist. For several minutes, the family watched, transfixed by the impossible movement. The lights seemed almost curious, drifting with the mist, pausing as though surveying the land below. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they flickered and vanished into the night. They returned home unsettled but quiet. No one would know about what they'd witnessed. No reports to police, no calls to newspapers, no letters to officials. This was a secret confined to their home, or so they thought. Several days later, a knock interrupted their silence. Two men in dark suits stood precisely dressed. Black coats, white shirts, narrow ties, and expressions devoid of emotion. "We'd like to speak with you about what you saw near the falls," one said. The father froze. He hadn't told a soul, not co-workers, not neighbors, not even extended family. Yet here were two strangers speaking as if they'd been standing beside him that night. Without waiting for a full invitation, the men entered. They moved through the living room methodically, scanning photographs, papers, and room corners. Their questions came rapid fire. "What time did you arrive? How many people were with you? Did you take photographs?" When told no photographs were taken, the men exchanged an unreadable glance. One pressed more firmly, "Are you certain?" The father repeated they'd carried no camera. They nodded in unison and left. Less than 20 minutes had passed, but the impact was profound. The family sat in silence after the door closed, each member turning the encounter over in their mind. The strangeness wasn't just in the men's appearance, but in their impossible knowledge. How could they know about the sighting? How could they know details never shared? That night, the children refused to sleep alone. The father sat awake in the kitchen watching the dark streak beyond, wondering. The family's encounter began with a simple set of headlights passing the house, transforming ordinary moments into something tense and watchful. Neighbors soon noticed the change. Children no longer played freely, curtains remained drawn, and conversations became guarded. When asked about their weekend at the falls, the parents gave minimal responses, carefully avoiding any mention of the lights. It seemed they feared that speaking about the experience might somehow summon the mysterious men back. Instead of reporting to local authorities, they kept their story quiet, sharing it only years later with the researchers who documented the case in private files. The visitors were described as official-looking, with flat speech and stiff expressions, asking invasive questions. Their presence marked a profound shift for the family. What began as an unsettling but almost wondrous sighting of strange lights above the water became a source of deep dread. The father, once sociable, grew increasingly private. He spoke less at work and dismissed UFO discussions with visible discomfort. The mother became fiercely protective, refusing to let the children wander the neighborhood after dark. Even years later, the memory of the knock at the door overshadowed the distant lights in the sky. Though the family never filed a formal report, their story eventually reached Canadian researchers. In 1967, Canada was experiencing its own wave of UFO sightings, with reports collected by civilian groups and government agencies like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the National Research Council. That year, high-profile cases drew international attention, including a notable incident in October when a glowing object crashed into the waters near Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia. The children, now grown, would later reflect on their unease. It wasn't just what they saw, but what they didn't do. The visitors seemed to be searching for photographs that never existed, as if needing proof that no proof was taken. Their visit left an indelible mark on the family's collective memory. Across the US-Canadian border in the summer of 1967, radar units tracked aerial objects that defied known aircraft capabilities. Their impossible speeds and maneuvers were quietly logged in official documents, with defense officials exchanging internal memoranda about the sightings. The Niagara Falls incident was not an isolated event, but part of a broader wave of unexplained phenomena sweeping through Canada. Multiple witnesses, including local police officers, reported the occurrence, and the Canadian Coast Guard launched a search of the waters. Both Canadian and American authorities, including NORAD, logged the case, yet no official explanation was ever provided. For researchers, the emergence of men in black reports in Ontario during this period was significant. These reports, appearing alongside documented government tracking, suggested witnesses were not only experiencing extraordinary events, but were also being silently warned against discussing them. The incident left a lasting impact on the family involved. Their children grew up with memories of strange lights and a noticeable change in their parents' behavior, becoming more cautious, private, and wary of strangers. The memory of an unexpected knock at the door became inseparable from the lights witnessed over the falls. This case underscored a pattern of encounters that crossed national borders. The details were eerily consistent. Black-suited men with pale faces asking mechanical questions, possessing knowledge no outsider should have. Similar encounters had been reported in Santa Ana, New Jersey, and Maine. Today, millions visit Niagara Falls each year, marveling at the water's spectacular descent. Few know that in 1967, a family stood at its edge and witnessed lights moving across the night sky with impossible speed. Fewer still understand the aftermath, the intimidating visitors who arrived to ensure silence about what had been seen. For that family, the falls were no longer just a natural wonder. They became a stark reminder that what you witness can follow you home, and that silence can be demanded not only by what hovers above, but by those who arrive in its wake. Brazil. Far from the bustling cities, the quiet rivers of Minas held a story that would challenge everything known about ordinary life. One morning in 1962, Jose Antonio da Silva set out before dawn. His small boat carried only fishing nets and a lifetime of routine expectations. This was a day like any other, or so he believed. The river was misty, with only the soft splash of oars and distant bird calls breaking the silence. Da Silva had made this journey countless times, his life a predictable rhythm of casting nets and returning home with enough fish to feed his family. But this morning was different. A strange glow appeared above the tree line, faint at first, then growing brighter. Da Silva initially thought it might be the sunrise reflecting through the fog. The light moved purposefully, descending until it hovered directly over his boat. A metallic, seamless craft hung silently above him. No engine sounds, no air disturbance. Just a brilliant humming light. A beam poured down, engulfing his boat. He felt his body lift, paralyzed and weightless. Later, Da Silva would describe fragmented memories. Strange figures moving unnaturally, unfamiliar instruments, sensations of cold and pressure. These beings seemed to observe him, communicating in sounds he couldn't understand. His last clear memory was a sharp pain in his head, then nothing. When he regained consciousness, the boat rocked gently. The sun was high, his nets untouched, and hours had vanished inexplicably. Returning home, he was visibly shaken. His family noticed immediately his silence, disheveled appearance, the distant look in his eyes. At first he shared only fragments of his experience, speaking quietly to his family. In a small community, such stories spread quickly. Neighbors whispered about strange lights. Journalists from regional newspapers arrived, pressing him for details. Initially reluctant and embarrassed, Da Silva eventually spoke. His account, though hesitant, remained consistent. A fisherman taken aboard an impossible craft, a story that would challenge everything people thought they knew about their world. One evening, walking home along a dusty rural road, he encountered two men whose presence defied the landscape. Their appearance was jarring. Tall figures in immaculate dark suits, white shirts, and narrow ties. Their shoes gleamed like they'd just stepped off a city street, not a dirt track. When they spoke Portuguese, the language was correct but mechanical, as if recited from a memorized script. "You must stop speaking of what you saw," one said. Dos Silva froze. Their manner was unnaturally precise, their faces pale and mask-like. They weren't threatening with words, but their very presence felt menacing. Their eyes remained unblinking, their features alien in a way he couldn't quite define. No credentials, no explanations, just a clear directive: do not talk to reporters, do not give interviews, do not repeat the story. When Silva insisted what happened was true, they stepped closer. One leaned in, inches from his face, repeating the command in the same flat tone. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, as if choreographed. The encounter was brief but profound. Their black-suited figures disappeared into the twilight, footsteps oddly muffled against the dirt. That night, Silva told his family about the strange men. His wife remembered his trembling. His children recalled his nervous pacing and constant glances toward the windows. From that moment, Silva changed. Reporters seeking follow-up interviews were turned away. Researchers found his door permanently closed. To his neighbors, he became a different man, silent, guarded, forever altered by that inexplicable encounter. No, De Silva's world changed dramatically after his encounter. What was once an open social life became a landscape of fear and constant vigilance. His family watched as he transformed from a gregarious fisherman to a man consumed by anxiety. Neighbors first noticed subtle shifts. His laughter disappeared from community gatherings. The marketplace no longer saw him lingering and chatting. His children observed his heightened alertness, constantly checking windows, scanning roads before stepping outside, pacing rooms at night. He spoke of strange occurrences to relatives. Unfamiliar cars parked at town edges. Silent men would appear and vanish without explanation. Even local fishermen, who previously knew his story, now avoided mentioning the river. His routine changed dramatically. Night travel ceased. Fishing became less frequent. Conversations became carefully measured, punctuated by nervous silences. The beings who had taken him during the initial craft encounter seemed to have fundamentally altered his existence. Beyond his personal experience, the incident rippled through the inactive community. Parents warned children about strange lights. Neighbors whispered about the event. The presence of mysterious men in dark suits spread a collective unease that extended far beyond Da Silva himself. Researchers saw his case as significant. It wasn't just an isolated American phenomenon. The same type of encounters happening in places like Santa Ana and Maine were now documented in rural Brazil. De Silva's experience bridged extraordinary encounters with systematic intimidation. Years later, Brazil would become central to UFO research, hosting Operation Plate, one of the most comprehensive official investigations in history. De Silva's story became part of a broader narrative about unexplained encounters and their lasting psychological impact. His case remained one of the clearest South American abduction examples, demonstrating how such experiences could fundamentally reshape an individual's and a community's perception of reality. Communities reported strange craft descending with beams of light that caused severe consequences: burns, illness, and even deaths. Decades later, the events would be documented by the Brazilian Air Force through hundreds of testimonies, photographs, and radar readings. These files remained classified until the 1990s and contained subtle indications of efforts to manage witnesses and discourage open discussion. The pattern was familiar to researchers. Whether through military channels or encounters on isolated country roads, the consistent message was silence. In this context, José Antonio Dilva's case took on a deeper significance. His experience foreshadowed a climate of intimidation that would emerge in colas. Dilva's subsequent retreat into private life mirrored the fear that would spread among Amazon witnesses, who later reported not just unexplained lights, but also mysterious men warning them against speaking out. For Dilva, the experience was deeply personal. He never sought publicity again, living out his life in cautious quiet. Neighbors remembered him not for what he claimed to have seen, but for the pervasive fear that seemed to shadow him afterward. Today, the rivers of Minas Gerais flow unchanged, carrying fishermen's nets, and the weight of forgotten stories. Few remember the morning Dilver returned home shaken, claiming he had been lifted into a craft not of this world. Even fewer recall the strangers who arrived afterward, their presence sharp and commanding. The craft had come and gone, but the men had stayed. Their presence lingered in every cautious glance, in every silence that followed. The unspoken question remained: was the intent not to erase the memory, but to ensure it remained buried? On June 9th, 1994, at Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri, Ron Johnson's story took a tragic turn. During a crowded MUFON meeting, he was discussing case files when sudden convulsions overcame him. Colleagues watched in shock as the healthy man in his early 40s, known for his sharp mind and calm demeanor, collapsed at the table. The official cause of death remained elusive. Toxicology tests provided no conclusive answers. Within the UFO investigator community, Johnson's death was not an isolated incident. In the weeks prior, he had told friends he had been warned about unspecified health risks. Not late nights, quiet visitors. Men who arrived without fanfare, their intent crystal clear. Stop asking questions. Ron Johnson wasn't famous in UFO circles, but within MUFON, he stood respected. Based in Missouri, he managed local investigators and case files as a state section director. His reputation was built on balance, skeptical when evidence faltered, receptive when witness accounts rang true. He had investigated sightings spanning from unexplained aerial lights to encounters involving physical traces. Farmers, teachers, and police officers trusted him because of his calm demeanor. Johnson wasn't interested in sensationalism. He documented meticulously. His thoroughness attracted attention beyond typical investigative circles. Detailed notes, organized files, and precise questions were his hallmarks. Weeks before his death in June 1994, Johnson hinted at encounters with inexplicable forces. At least 2 colleagues heard about his strange interaction with mysterious men. After a regional MUFON meeting, 2 men in dark suits waited near the exit. They knew his name before introductions, steering him into a quiet conversation away from others. Their manner seemed calm, but their questions cut sharper than ever before. They probed specifically about physical evidence MUFON held in Missouri, particularly race samples from a field where a disc had been reported. Their questioning felt rehearsed, each line delivered clinically and impersonally. When Johnson attempted to understand their identity, they deflected. No agency, no badge, no documentation was offered. The encounter turned more unsettling when one man leaned closer, lowering his voice. The message was direct: pursuing certain leads, especially those involving physical traces, would be detrimental to his health. Not Johnson's colleagues recalled his unease following a meeting. He returned to his desk visibly shaken, his usual calm disrupted, shuffling notes into his folder more quickly than normal. His eyes darted around the room. In the following weeks, he shared fragmented stories with trusted peers. Investigators later recounted how Johnson described the men as official without being official, and emphasized their interest in not yet public files. One colleague remembered him saying, "They knew more about my cases than I had told anyone outside MUF." In public, Johnson laughed off the encounter, joking about suits who seemed to know too much, but those close to him recognized his humor as a nervous facade. Privately, he admitted the encounter rattled him more deeply than any previous skeptical challenge. His behavior began to subtly change. During meetings, he still contributed, but with increased caution. Where he once shared details freely, he now spoke in generalized terms. His notes remained closed until his turn to speak, then quickly tucked away once discussion ended. At home, his family noticed new patterns. He drew blinds earlier in the evening and meticulously checked the street before opening doors. His wife acknowledged she didn't fully understand what troubled him, only that he seemed more guarded and watchful. A close friend simply observed that Ron looked like a man suddenly aware someone was monitoring his work. On the day of his death, Johnson attended a routine MUF gathering, not presenting a major paper or unveiling a discovery, but doing what he always did, contributing quietly, listening carefully, managing files. At some point during the meeting, he sipped from his glass. Minutes later, he convulsed. Witnesses described his collapse as sudden and violent. Medical help was immediately summoned, but proved futile. For MUF members present, the shock was instantaneous. Johnson had no known serious health issues. His death, Sudden and public, felt incongruous, almost staged in its timing. The glass on the table became a silent point of speculation. Authorities moved quickly. Toxicology tests were conducted but produced no conclusive results. No trace of poison, no clear medical explanation for the collapse. The final report labeled it a sudden unexplained death. Police did not treat the incident as suspicious. To them, it was an unfortunate tragedy, nothing more. Non Johnson died. The impact on MUFON was immediate and profound. He had been well liked and widely respected, and his death created both grief and unease among his colleagues. Some members insisted it was a tragic medical event, a mere coincidence. Others whispered about warnings, convinced his work had brought him into contact with forces determined to silence him. In the aftermath, several colleagues altered their investigative approaches. Some reduced their activity, declining to pursue cases involving physical evidence and citing concerns about unwanted attention. A few withdrew from public UFO research altogether. Others continued their work, but became more guarded, avoiding sharing details as openly as before. When MUF members raised the possibility of prior warnings, officials dismissed the idea. One investigator bluntly stated that without toxins, there could be no crime. For MUFON, this inconclusiveness was more troubling than any definitive answer. A natural cause might be acceptable, but a collapse with no explanation following weeks of reported intimidation seemed to align too closely with a darker possibility. Ron's death told his colleagues two crucial things. As one longtime investigator summarized, they were vulnerable and there were lines they weren't supposed to cross. Lines no one would reveal until it was too late. Another member, reflecting years later, put it simply, the message was received. Whether he died by chance or by design, the effect was the same. They stepped back. Johnson's family bore the weight as well, fielding calls from reporters and MUFON members while receiving little clarity from officials. His wife later expressed the hardest part was not knowing whether to believe in coincidence or connection. Ron believed he had been warned, telling a colleague, "If he was right, then someone out there knows more than we ever will." For the witnesses Johnson had interviewed, the impact was quieter but real. Some wondered if their cases had drawn attention, leading to his intimidation. Others hesitated to share details with MUFON, fearing their testimony could carry unintended consequences. Over the years, Johnson's death became part of MUFON's internal history, spoken of carefully without sensationalism, but never forgotten. He was remembered not only for his investigations, but for the warnings he carried into his final weeks. His files remained, but they were read differently. Every case he had touched was now seen through the lens of his caution. Ron Johnson's story resonated deeply within the UFO research community, revealing the potential risks faced by investigators. The information in those folders might have carried more weight than anyone initially realized. His experience suggested that the line between documenting sensitive information and endangering oneself was far more delicate than most assumed. Colleagues remember Johnson as a complex figure. They recall a man who once joked about mysterious suits with insider knowledge, but who later became increasingly guarded. They remember his sudden collapse at the table, with notes still spread out before him and the unsettling silence that followed. This silence spoke volumes of withdrawn colleagues, wandering families, and a community left uncertain about the dangers inherent in pursuing hidden truths. Johnson's legacy transcended the cases he studied. It became a stark reminder that in UFO research the real significance often lay not in the unexplained phenomena, but in the individuals who investigated them, those whose warnings carried an unspoken finality that no document could fully capture. This narrative connects to Dr. Gosis, Herbert Hopkins, a physician and part-time hypnotist working on the David Stevens abduction case. On a quiet September evening in 1976, with his family away, Hopkins was reviewing his notes when he received an unusual phone call. The caller, calm and measured, claimed to represent a UFO research group and asked to visit to discuss the Stevens investigation. Hopkins, neither a UFO enthusiast nor a public crusader, was simply a professional lending his medical skills to an intriguing local investigation. By 1994, Johnson had passed away, with his death remaining officially unexplained, though unofficially linked to the mysterious visits he had described. His story and Hopkins' experience highlighted a broader truth. In the world of UFO research, the boundaries between investigation and personal risk were frighteningly thin. The men who pursued these investigations often found themselves walking a razor's edge between curiosity and potential danger. Not Comfings opened the door to find a figure that seemed more apparition than man. The caller had arrived seconds after their phone conversation, far too quickly for anyone to have traveled across town. It was as if he had been waiting outside. The visitor wore a neatly pressed black suit with a white shirt and black tie. His appearance was deeply unsettling. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost waxy, and completely bald. No eyebrows, no eyelashes. His lips looked crudely painted, giving an artificial, eerie effect. Despite his shock, Hopkins invited the stranger inside. Once seated, the man began asking questions about the Stevens case. His voice was flat and mechanical, and Hopkins felt the room's air grow heavy with an inexplicable pressure. The stranger asked Hopkins to retrieve a coin from his pocket. Confused, Hopkins pulled out a copper penny and followed the man's instructions to place it in his palm and focus. As Hopkins stared, something extraordinary happened. The coin began to shimmer and blur, then faded away entirely. "Neither you nor anyone else on this plane will ever see that coin again," the visitor said with chilling calmness. For Hopkins, a man of science trained to observe and explain, this moment shattered his rational understanding of the world. The stranger continued, revealing intimate details about the Stevens abduction case that Hopkins had never shared publicly. He knew specifics from hypnosis sessions that should have been locked away in private notes and recordings. It became clear that this visitor had access to information beyond ordinary means. As the conversation progressed, Hopkins observed the man weakening. His words slowed, his breathing became shallow, and he moved awkwardly in the chair, struggling to stay upright. At one point, he pulled out a small metallic device that resembled a lipstick case, pressing it to his lips. He seemed to use it for breathing or speaking, creating an impression that he was not entirely human or functioning normally within Hopkins' understanding of the world. Before the visitor left, he gave Hopkins direct instructions to destroy all evidence of his work on the Stevens case, the notes, the tapes, everything. If Hopkins didn't comply, consequences would follow. Delivered with clinical certainty, the words were not shouted or emotional, which made them even more terrifying. Shaken, Hopkins agreed. The visitor then rose unsteadily and asked Hopkins to escort him to the door. As Hopkins watched him move toward the road, he noticed the awkwardness of his steps, almost robotic. In the distance, a bluish light flickered, and Hopkins assumed the man was collected by some vehicle or perhaps something else entirely. Left deeply unsettled, Hopkins soon destroyed his research material. Fear had overtaken curiosity. He erased the hypnosis tapes and burned his notes, effectively abandoning his work on the Stevens abduction. In later interviews, Hopkins described the visitor's face as mask-like, with features that didn't seem to belong on living skin. The lips appeared painted on, the skin stretched and waxy. An absolute absence of hair was notable. His shoes looked oversized, as though they didn't belong to him, and his movements were clumsy and uncoordinated, like a machine attempting to mimic human movement. Hopkins was convinced the visitor was not human. The encounter permanently changed him. Though he continued practicing medicine, he withdrew from UFO research entirely. He spoke cautiously about the incident, aware of potential ridicule. Those who knew him personally, however, attested to his sincerity and credibility. He was not a man who invented tales. What had happened that night had clearly disturbed him in a way no hoax or trick could explain. For researchers of the Men in Black phenomenon, the Hopkins case became pivotal. It contained many hallmarks found in other reports. The sudden phone call, the impossibly rapid arrival, the artificial appearance, the threat to abandon UFO research, and the demonstration of strange abilities. The vanishing coin in particular became one of the most famous details, illustrating how these figures seemed to manipulate matter, or at least perception, in ways beyond explanation. Skeptics attempted to explain the incident, suggesting Hopkins had been the victim of an elaborate prank, perhaps performed by a skilled illusionist or hoaxer with access to his information. Hopkins' encounter with a strange visitor remained etched in his memory, a story he maintained until his death, despite potential personal cost. Unlike fabricated tales, his account held a disturbing consistency with numerous other Men in Black reports spanning decades. The small town of Jerton, Arkansas, epitomized rural America in the mid-1970s. Its rhythm was predictable. Church gatherings, football games, and freight trains cutting through the countryside. But in the fall of 1975, something extraordinary disrupted this tranquil landscape. That evening, locals witnessed a series of bright, darting lights over the woods and railroad tracks. These weren't distant celestial objects, but close, silent, and eerily maneuverable. Witnesses described glowing spheres and elongated ovals with bluish halos, moving in coordinated patterns at speeds impossible for conventional aircraft. The Hopkins case, similar to Albert Bender's experiences in the 1950s, became a landmark in the Men in Black mystery. Witnesses consistently described officials who appeared human but seemed fundamentally wrong, more like constructed entities designed to enforce secrecy than actual government agents. Hopkins captured the essence of his encounter in a haunting statement. "I was like talking to a machine. Not a man, but a machine disguised as a man." This chilling description underscores why the incident endures, not just for its strangeness, but for Hopkins' credibility. Some attempted to explain the experience as a hallucination, but such theories failed to address the testimony's consistency and broader contextual similarities. What made Hopkins' account compelling was his lack of motivation to fabricate it. He stood to lose everything: his professional reputation, credibility, and peace of mind, yet he persisted, quietly but firmly maintaining the reality of what he'd experienced. His story serves as a stark reminder that those investigating UFO mysteries often encounter forces determined to keep the truth hidden. 9. In the famous Girton Light area, local folklore had long spoken of ghostly encounters. But one night changed everything. A witness watched in awe as two glowing objects hovered silently above the trees. One of these objects split into two smaller lights, and then all three suddenly shot upward and vanished in an instant. Word of the sighting spread quickly. The witness first told his supervisor, then shared the story with others in town. Soon, half a dozen people were discussing the strange phenomenon. Families whispered about it in diners and on front porches. Local teenagers, hungry for excitement, began exploring the woods, hoping to witness something extraordinary. A week later, the incident took an unexpected turn. Late one evening, the witness received an unusual visit. Two men dressed in dark suits knocked on his door, a rare occurrence in a small rural community. These visitors were eerily similar, pale, expressionless, and moving with an unnatural stiffness. They introduced themselves vaguely as government investigators looking into aerial activity. Once inside, their questioning became intense. They weren't just interested in what he had seen, but who else he might have told. Their tone was calm, yet carried a clear underlying threat. "It would be best if you didn't continue talking about the lights. Once there could be consequences." The witness found their behavior deeply unsettling. One man rarely blinked, and when he did, it seemed mechanical, like someone awkwardly mimicking human behavior. Their speech was formal but strange, as if they were reciting rehearsed lines. After their brief, uncomfortable conversation, the men rose simultaneously, thanked him, and left in a dark car parked on the roadside. They were never seen again. Simultaneously, other witnesses began reporting peculiar phone calls. One family, who had originally watched the lights together, received calls at odd hours. These calls were marked by eerie silence or a mechanical voice that would abruptly cut off mid-sentence. Not after a strange sighting at a work site, two unidentified strangers approached the witness. When questioned, they simply turned and walked away without explanation. The town was deeply unsettled by how precisely these visitors seemed to know who had witnessed the unusual lights. People who had only quietly shared their experiences with close friends or colleagues were being singled out. It felt like someone was systematically tracking down witnesses. This pattern closely resembled well-documented UFO encounters across the country. The classic Men in Black scenario involved mysterious figures appearing after a sighting, subtly warning witnesses to remain silent. At the time, most residents of Girton had never heard of such encounters, yet their descriptions were strikingly consistent. Pale men in suits, speaking in unnatural tones, arriving in unmarked dark vehicles. These details matched accounts from other states and even other countries. In the following weeks, light sightings decreased, but an underlying tension remained. Some residents felt constantly surveilled, especially near the railroad tracks at night. Teenagers who had searched for the lights reported being followed home by a dark car with its headlights extinguished, never getting close enough to identify the driver. Researchers investigating later found locals reluctant to speak. Many have been intimidated into silence, uncertain whether their visitors were official agents or something more enigmatic. Witnesses described their visitors in ways that defied logical explanation. Their voices were flat, expressions blank, their presence more oppressive than overtly threatening, as if enforcing silence on behalf of unknown forces. The Gurdon case never reached national attention, remaining a quiet story shared among UFO researchers and whispered about for decades. For those who experienced it, the memory remained vivid. One witness years later told an investigator that the lights themselves weren't frightening. They might have been from the Air Force or something unexplained, but the men, they weren't right. The way they knew things they shouldn't know made it clear that silence was the safest response. Like many Men in Black incidents, the Gurdon case offered no physical evidence, no photographs, no official documentation. Its significance lay in the pattern it revealed. No witnesses who saw something extraordinary in the sky quickly found themselves targeted. Strange figures would arrive, seemingly intent on burying the story. The accounts, consistent across decades and continents, carry a weight that goes beyond simple small-town rumors. Jerome Clark, a respected UFO researcher, meticulously documented these encounters. Through extensive correspondence and interviews, he uncovered a disturbing pattern. People who reported UFO sightings often experienced unsettling follow-up visits from mysterious individuals. The Men in Black presented an enigma. Were they government agents? If so, why the elaborate charade? Their unnatural mannerisms, strange speech, and menacing telephone silences suggested something more sinister. If not government operatives, then what were they? Perhaps beings with a vested interest in keeping humanity ignorant of what truly flies in its skies. Take the case of a Minnesota couple in the early 1970s. They witnessed a glowing disc landing in their field. Days later, two men in dark suits arrived, claiming to represent a government agency. The visitors appeared eerily identical, their demeanor designed to intimidate and silence. Witnesses had seen something inexplicable and been warned to remain silent. Most complied, allowing the story to fade into the margins of UFO history. Yet the memory of these unannounced arrivals in a quiet southern town continues to haunt the edges of the phenomenon. While many researchers of the 1960s and 70s relied on sensationalism, Clark was different. He approached each case with careful objectivity, cataloging reports with precision. His collected accounts form a compelling mosaic of encounters, revealing a chilling consistency in witness descriptions. The incidents stand out not just for their bizarre nature, but for the systematic attempt to suppress information about unexplained aerial phenomena. Clark's work offers a rare window into this strange pattern of intimidation that follows many UFO sightings. Visitors with expressionless faces approached a couple after a sighting. Their clothing seemed outdated, and their questions revealed more about their intentions than any genuine curiosity about the event. When the husband mentioned sharing details with a neighbor, one visitor issued a chilling warning, continuing to discuss the incident could have serious consequences for his family. Clark's files contained numerous similar accounts. An Ohio researcher documenting luminous objects over rural highways experienced a threatening encounter after a library presentation. A late-night phone call warned him to abandon his research, with a mechanical voice advising him to destroy his notes. The next day, two men in a black car stationed themselves outside his office, watching silently for hours. Intimidated, he eventually abandoned his investigation. These encounters weren't isolated incidents. Entire communities reported similar experiences. In Iowa, farmers who witnessed strange lights moving over cornfields were subsequently visited by men posing as insurance investigators. Their conversations focused exclusively on the lights, with clear instructions to remain silent about what they had seen. One farmer told Clark that these encounters felt less like inquiries and more like direct orders. What struck Clark most was the visitors' seemingly impossible knowledge. Witnesses reported being questioned about details they had only shared privately with family members, suggesting an extraordinary level of surveillance or something far more mysterious. Clark found these accounts difficult to categorize. The descriptions were remarkably consistent: dark-suited men with pale skin and unusual speech patterns who issued stern warnings. Yet the experiences often bordered on the inexplicable, defying straightforward explanation. Sometimes the visitors seemed unnaturally strange, like a person whose mouth didn't match their speech, or suited men who would stare motionlessly at offered coffee. Clark's collected accounts revealed consistent patterns about these mysterious visitors. Their vehicles were always the same: immaculate black sedans without license plates that would materialize suddenly on rural roads or alongside lone travelers, then vanish just as quickly. One particularly haunting report came from an Illinois man who claimed that after filming a bright object, his visitors warned him to stay silent. As their car drove away, it seemingly dematerialized, fading into thin air before reaching the road's end. The psychological impact on witnesses was profound. UFO sightings might have been strange and awe-inspiring, but the men in black were terrifying. Cold and invasive, these encounters left people feeling violated. Many witnesses abandoned their curiosity entirely, choosing silence over further investigation. Clark's research gained credibility through the diversity of his sources. Farmers, professionals, housewives, and police officers all shared similar stories. The connecting thread wasn't their background, but their proximity to a UFO sighting and willingness to speak about it. Skeptics offered various explanations. Some suggested these were exaggerated memories of government agents, perhaps connected to Air Force investigations. Others viewed them as psychological manifestations born from cultural fears and paranoia. Clark maintained a careful, neutral approach. He documented cases meticulously, avoiding both dismissal and supernatural interpretation. His goal was preserving testimony for future study, yet he acknowledged the unsettling implications. Whether human or something else, these figures seemed determined to suppress UFO knowledge through intimidations, and the men in black have a unique ability to control the narrative around unexplained phenomena. Researchers studying their impact point to a crucial observation: their power lies not just in their appearance, but in the profound silence they leave in their wake. Clark's extensive collection reveals a pattern that transcends individual stories. Witnesses suddenly fall quiet. Research comes to a halt. Evidence vanishes without explanation. These figures are less active enforcers and more living embodiments of secrecy. The tapestry of encounters stretches across time and geography. From Bender's experiences in the early 1950s to Hopkins' terrifying night in Maine, the stories share a common thread. Wherever UFOs appear, the men in black are not far behind. Their purpose seems clear: to ensure the mystery remains just that, a mystery. Albert K. Bender's story exemplifies this pattern. In 1952, he founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, IFFB, one of the first civilian UFO organizations in the United States. His goal was straightforward: connect enthusiasts and investigators worldwide in the search for answers about flying saucers. The organization quickly gained international attention, publishing a newsletter that boldly explored sightings and theories. Then everything changed. Bender claimed 3 strange men in dark suits visited him unannounced. They possessed glowing hypnotic eyes and communicated telepathically, delivering a message that was more command than request. These visitors didn't just use words to intimidate. They seemed to transmit a sense of futility directly into Bender's thoughts. The result was immediate and dramatic. He disbanded the IFSB almost overnight, ceased publishing, and completely withdrew from public view. Whether human, alien, or something in between, the men in black continue to fascinate researchers. Clark's work remains a cornerstone for those seeking to understand these enigmatic figures who appear to exist solely to maintain the unexplained shroud of mystery. In the years following Bender's cryptic account, similar experiences began to surface across the country. Investigators and UFO chroniclers like Jerome Clark and John Keel noted a recurring pattern: witnesses describing encounters with 3 men that eerily mirrored Bender's original story. A case from West Virginia in the late 1950s exemplified this trend. A UFO witness reported 3 men in black suits arriving at his home in the dead of night. Their movements were stiff, their voices mechanical, and they radiated an oppressive presence. Dark, shining eyes instilled a sense of terror as they warned him against sharing his experience. Another incident emerged from California in the early 1960s. A woman and her children had witnessed a saucer-shaped craft near their neighborhood. Shortly after, 3 men in dark clothing arrived in a black car with no license plates. They knocked with unnatural precision and requested to enter her home. Inside her living room, the men sat motionless, Their questioning focused not on the craft's details, but on her emotional state and potential conversations since the sighting. Witnesses consistently described these visitors as utterly alien, with halting speech and expressionless faces. Some noted they seemed to glide rather than walk. These compiled reports suggested Bender's story was far from an isolated fantasy. The three men appeared whenever someone approached a truth that needed concealing. Their presence raised persistent questions about what exactly needed to remain hidden. In 1962, Bender himself published a book titled Flying Saucers and the Three Men, providing a more elaborate account of his mysterious encounter. His peers remained confused. The group he had built seemed on the verge of expansion, yet he abruptly closed its doors, offering only cryptic hints that he knew something profound but could not reveal it. The mystery deepened. Each account echoed similar themes: unexplained visitors, cryptic warnings, and a sense of being silenced by forces beyond ordinary comprehension. Entities lived beneath the ocean, operating from a base on Earth. Their purpose was to harvest resources and observe humanity. Bender's book, written in his distinctive style, was met with significant skepticism, even among UFO researchers. Some viewed the account as too fantastical, more fiction than fact. Yet others perceived it as an authentic experience, seen through the lens of Bender's unique perspective and imagination. What lent credibility to his encounter were the striking parallels in later cases. Witnesses from distant regions who had never met Bender consistently reported identical core details: the sudden appearance of three men in dark suits, an oppressive psychic pressure, a command to abandon UFO investigations, and a lingering fear. These similarities pointed to more than mere fabrication. Researchers debated the nature of these three men. Were they extraterrestrials disguised in human form? Psychological projections born of fear and suggestion? Or perhaps a shadowy branch of human intelligence operating so strangely that they seemed less than human? John Keel, author of the Mothman Prophecies, proposed they might represent ultra-terrestrial beings, not from another planet, but from another layer of reality. These entities could manifest in forms designed to manipulate human perception. Keel saw Bender's account as a foundational example of their method, not through physical violence, but through psychological control and enforced silence. For Bender, the effect was permanent. After the encounter, he lived quietly, distanced from the UFO community. When occasionally pressed, he would only hint that he knew more than he could reveal, suggesting that silence was both necessary and wise. He appeared burdened, not relieved, by the knowledge he had gained. Follow-up accounts revealed a consistent pattern. Those visited by similar figures described an overwhelming urge to withdraw, to remain silent, to erase what they had witnessed. It wasn't mere intimidation, it was as though their very will to pursue answers had been systematically drained. Looking back, the Bender Three Men episode represents a significant turning point in UFO history. It was among the first instances where the Men in Black transitioned from rumor to central mythology, attempting not just to silence individuals, but to shape the entire culture of UFO research. By targeting the founder of the first organized UFO investigative group, they made a powerful statement. Decades before becoming president, Jimmy Carter's UFO encounter became a notable moment in his biography. In 1969, while running for governor in Leary, Georgia, Carter and around 10 other people witnessed a strange aerial phenomenon during a Lions Club meeting. He described a luminous orb that hovered silently, changing colors before moving away. Carter was clear about what he saw: not a conventional aircraft, weather balloon, or astronomical object. Years later, in 1973, he filed a formal report with the International UFO Bureau, openly discussing the experience with the reporters. He took care to explain that while the object was unidentified, he didn't believe it was extraterrestrial. Instead, Carter suggested it was likely an unknown natural phenomenon. His candor was unusual for a politician in an era when UFO sightings were typically dismissed or ridiculed. This openness both endeared him to some and raised skepticism among others. Few public figures would speak so frankly about such an encounter. This sighting became more than a curious footnote. It reportedly drew the attention of the mysterious Men in Black and added another layer of intrigue to Carter's later attempts at disclosure. The phenomenon of unexplained encounters wasn't new. Previous investigations into UFO sightings had shown that those seeking to bring order to the chaos of reporting often faced significant disruption. The case of Albert Bender illustrated this perfectly. Bender's sudden withdrawal from UFO research raised suspicions even among skeptics. His publication had momentum, but then came an abrupt silence. His subsequent book read more like a coded confession than a clear account. What could explain Bender's dramatic retreat, if not a genuine encounter? Today, the Bender case remains a cornerstone of men in black lore. These mysterious figures did more than silence Bender, they cast a shadow over future investigators, ensuring that silence became the standard response to extraordinary experiences. 1976 presidential campaign, Carter boldly pledged to reveal all government UFO information, framing his promise as a matter of transparency and citizens' right to know. However, this commitment mysteriously vanished once he became president. Carter's interest in UFOs stemmed from his own reported sighting, which drew significant attention and seemingly triggered a series of unusual encounters. Multiple individuals close to Carter during his gubernatorial and early presidential campaigns later described being approached by strange, official-looking men who discouraged further discussion about UFOs. These encounters closely mirrored the Men in Black stories reported by citizens nationwide. Typically, these figures wore dark suits, drove unmarked cars, and spoke in unnaturally measured tones. They claimed to be federal agents, but never produced actual credentials. One particularly notable account involved a Carter campaign volunteer who had enthusiastically discussed the governor's UFO interest. Within days, two men in black suits visited his home, identifying themselves only as government representatives. They carefully questioned what the volunteer knew about Carter's statements and subtly warned against public disclosure. Another incident involved a Carter staffer in Georgia who privately encouraged more openness about UFOs. Shortly after, the staffer reported being followed by a dark, tinted-window sedan. When he attempted to confront the vehicle by pulling over, it simply disappeared down a side road, leaving him unsettled. While Carter never publicly confirmed being personally visited by these mysterious figures, researchers claimed that individuals within his inner circle hinted at such encounters. One researcher recounted a story from a former aide, suggesting that Carter had been warned by official-looking men to avoid pursuing the UFO subject during his presidency. These interactions seemed to have a chilling effect. The warnings appeared calculated to discourage Carter from further exploring or discussing UFO-related information, potentially explaining why his initial promises of full disclosure ultimately faded into silence. Now, when Jimmy Carter first spoke openly about UFOs, he never expected the subsequent shift in his communication. Reporters pressed him about potential national security risks involved in releasing such info from his earlier transparency. Some interpreted this reversal as evidence of pressure from shadowy intelligence figures, whose methods echoed classic conspiracy narratives. Whether through silent threats, classified briefings, or strange official visits, the outcome remained consistent. Carter stopped discussing the topic. Skeptics offer a different perspective. They suggest Carter's silence stemmed from understanding the complex intersections between UFO questions and sensitive military technologies like spy satellites. From their view, his retreat was a practical political maneuver rather than a result of intimidation. However, believers draw parallels with countless witness experiences. How many citizens had reported being silenced after UFO sightings by mysterious men in suits? Carter's case was particularly compelling because it involved a future president, not just an ordinary individual. Researchers like Timothy Green Beckley and Jerome Clark documented these alleged encounters, noting consistent details: pale men in ill-fitting suits, unmarked black cars, mechanical voices, and stern warnings to drop the subject. While Carter never directly confirmed these reports, their remarkable similarity suggested his openness had indeed attracted attention. In later years, Carter maintained his original stance. He acknowledged seeing something unidentified but not necessarily extraterrestrial. When questioned about why he never pursued UFO disclosure during his presidency, he consistently cited national security considerations and swiftly changed the posed subject. For close observers, his silence spoke volumes. If the Men in Black were real, and their mission was suppressing UFO knowledge, Carter represented a significant challenge. A high-profile figure with a personal UFO experience and initial willingness to discuss it openly. The UFO Encounters legacy, particularly through Jimmy Carter's experience, reveals the complex intersection of mystery and political power. Carter, a president built on a reputation for transparency, fell silent after encounters with enigmatic figures, whether interpreted as intelligence operatives, psychological archetypes, or non-human entities. For believers in the Men in Black, this story confirms their far-reaching influence. These shadowy figures don't merely target isolated witnesses like farmers or truck drivers. Instead, they penetrate the highest levels of government, ensuring that even top leaders conform to their agenda. Skeptics view the narrative differently, seeing it as a testament to how secrecy and politics are deeply intertwined. The incident demonstrates how even the most honest leaders eventually learn the boundaries of what can be disclosed. Timothy Green Beckley, known as the UFO Hunter and Mr. UFO of New York, dedicated his career to documenting these extraordinary accounts. His research spanned abduction claims and paranormal encounters, but consistently returned to one unsettling theme: the Men in Black. Beckley's work was no mere compilation of second-hand stories. Through years of rigorous investigation, he personally interviewed witnesses confronted by these mysterious visitors. His collected cases painted a broader picture, not of isolated incidents, but of a systematic campaign of intimidation and surveillance stretching across rural and urban landscapes. A particularly compelling case from New Jersey in the early 1970s involved a family reporting strange nocturnal lights in their backyard. Small, glowing orbs darted among the trees, challenging conventional understanding and hinting at something beyond ordinary explanation. The encounter stands as one of those rare moments where the mysteries of the skies intersect with human experience, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and profound silence. The UFO encounters documented by Beckley often followed a chilling pattern. Families would report strange aerial activity, with unexplained craft hovering near their homes. When they sought to share their experiences, the consequences were swift and unsettling. In one case, after repeated nighttime sightings, the family contacted a local newspaper. The story never made print. Instead, two men in dark suits arrived at their door, banging forcefully and demanding entry. These officials investigating aerial phenomena behaved far from professionally. They moved through the house uninvited, searching through closets and cupboards, as if hunting for something specific. When confronted, one of the men turned abruptly and delivered a stark warning: "You will forget what you saw. Do not speak of it again." The words left the family terrified and silenced. Years later, they would still only whisper their account to Beckley, fear etched in their voices. Another incident unfolded in New York City. A group of teenagers witnessed a disc-shaped craft hovering over a vacant lot one summer night. The next day, two men in black suits appeared at one boy's home. Claiming to be government agents, they provided no identification. Instead, they told the boy's mother the children must have been mistaken and warned against spreading such stories. The mother later described the men's unnervingly blank expressions and mechanical voices. Following their visit, the boy withdrew completely, never speaking of the incident again. Similar accounts filled Beckley's files. One witness reported receiving a late-night phone call with a flat, metallic voice warning him to stop discussing his UFO sighting. Minutes later, a man in a dark suit seemingly conjured from the phone call stood at his door. Beckley's unique contribution was his ability to connect these individual experiences. He recognized a consistent pattern: an initial sighting followed by intimidation, silencing, and psychological manipulation. The Men in Black weren't just trying to suppress information, they were systematically erasing witnesses' experiences, leaving behind only fragments of fear and uncertainty. The phenomenon of Men in Black had long intrigued UFO researcher Jim Beckley, who collected extensive accounts from witnesses reporting strange encounters. These witnesses shared remarkably consistent stories about psychological intimidation, despite having no connection to one another. Witnesses described deeply unsettling experiences. They spoke of overwhelming dread, sudden energy depletion, and unexplained memory loss after encounters. Some reported entire conversations seemingly erased from their minds. These accounts echoed earlier reports by Albert Bender and Herbert Hopkins, suggesting the Men in Black were not simply silencing witnesses, but fundamentally altering their perception of reality. Beckley himself was not exempt from this phenomenon. He claimed to have been watched after publishing articles and speaking at conferences. One night in the 1980s, he witnessed a dark sedan parked outside his New York apartment, its headlights off and driver barely visible. When he attempted to approach the vehicle, it silently disappeared down the street without illuminating its lights. While he could not definitively prove direct targeting, Beckley believed his work had attracted their attention. Skeptics challenged his credibility, arguing that his willingness to publish fringe accounts blurred the lines between UFO research and paranormal investigation. Despite these criticisms, even his detractors acknowledged the value of his documented testimonies. His compilation UFO Silences became a landmark collection, preserving decades of Men in Black encounters. Beckley presented these figures not as simple mysterious visitors, but as systematic silencers operating across different times and locations. He never claimed to understand their true nature, whether government operatives, extraterrestrial agents, or something more enigmatic. In interviews, Beckley sometimes suggested these entities might be psychic rather than physical beings. He noted their behavior seemed performative, as if awkwardly mimicking human interactions. Their outdated clothing and imperfect mannerisms further supported this unconventional interpretation. Without Beckley's documentation, many of these extraordinary stories would have remained hidden, lost to fear and intimidation. Not Timothy Green Beckley dedicated his life to documenting a phenomenon that haunted the edges of UFO research: the Men in Black. These enigmatic figures left psychological scars on witnesses, often silencing or traumatizing those who encountered them. Beckley's encounters revealed a disturbing pattern. Witnesses spoke of strange visitors with stilted speech and surreal appearances. Some wondered if these figures were projections or manifestations of a larger unknown intelligence designed to instill fear. What remained constant was the genuine terror experienced by those who encountered them. The impact was profound. Some witnesses abandoned their interest in UFOs. Others became so shaken that they avoided public spaces for weeks or months. By the time of his death in 2021, Beckley had amassed one of the largest personal archives of Men in Black reports. His true legacy was not about providing definitive answers, but about giving voice to those who might otherwise have remained unheard. He created space for ordinary people to share extraordinary experiences, ensuring the Men in Black remained part of the ongoing conversation about UFO encounters. Albert Rosales, a Cuban-born researcher, complemented this work through his obsessive cataloging of humanoid encounters. While many researchers focused on spacecraft or abduction cases, Rosales meticulously documented testimonies of beings seen in fields, bedrooms, forests, and city streets. Within Rosales' extensive archives, a consistent thread emerged. Witnesses who encountered strange figures or unidentified craft frequently reported subsequent visits from men in dark suits, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. Beckley himself captured the essence of this phenomenon perfectly. You don't have to believe in them for them to believe in you. They are the keepers of silence. And if you step too close to the truth, they will be here. They always have been. For many researchers, these accounts serve as a reminder that the Men in Black are more than a curious footnote. They are central to the history of UFO encounters, as important as the sightings themselves. If UFOs represent the visible mystery in the skies, then the Men in Black are the invisible force, ensuring those mysteries remain unexplained. Groups targeted individuals or sometimes worked in teams of 2 or 3. Their consistent goal was to unsettle, disorient, and suppress information. Rosales' research revealed a pattern spanning different cultures and geographical regions. In the mid-1960s, a woman from Puerto Rico reported an encounter that exemplified this phenomenon. She described seeing a disc-shaped craft near her neighborhood, with small figures briefly visible. After sharing her experience with her husband and a close friend, 2 men in dark suits arrived at her home. These men presented themselves as government agents investigating aerial sightings. Their questioning was deeply unsettling. They probed how much she remembered, whether she had discussed the incident, and if she had documented anything. When she admitted to sketching the craft, one of the men demanded the drawing, which she surrendered. They departed without further explanation, leaving her permanently altered. Years later, she remained convinced her communications were monitored and that she had been somehow marked. Her fear was palpable and enduring. Another case from Rosales' files originated in 1970s Texas. A man reported witnessing a glowing oval craft hovering silently above a field. After stopping his truck to observe its slow movement toward the horizon, he was subsequently approached at his workplace by 2 men wearing black suits. These visitors claimed to be investigators but offered no identification. They informed him that what he had seen was a test vehicle, and strongly advised against discussing the incident. What profoundly disturbed him was their precise knowledge of his exact time and location of the sighting, despite him never having reported it publicly. European cases mirrored these experiences. A 1974 French report detailed a couple's encounter with three men who arrived in a black Citroën following their observation of a hovering disc near their village. The visitors asked intrusive questions about the couple's personal and professional lives, not just about the sighting itself. When the couple grew suspicious and requested the men's credentials, they received only vague responses like, "We represent the authorities," before abruptly leaving. The couple described the visitors as unnervingly similar in appearance, wearing slightly outdated suits and moving in a mechanical manner. Rosales was particularly intrigued by the consistent characteristics of these mysterious encounters. The world of extraterrestrial sightings holds dark, unsettling narratives that go far beyond simple, unexplained lights in the sky. Researcher Alberto Rosales uncovered accounts where witnesses described encounters not just with strange aerial phenomena, but with actual beings, short figures with luminous characteristics and glowing eyes. These humanoid encounters often followed a chilling pattern. Shortly after witnessing extraordinary events, mysterious men in dark suits would appear, seeming to trigger a precise containment protocol. Their origins remained unclear, but their intentions seemed deliberate. One haunting example from Argentina in the late 1960s illustrates this pattern. A family reported a close encounter with a luminous craft and small humanoids near their farm. Soon after, two immaculately dressed men arrived in a pristine black car. They demanded to inspect the encounter site and warned the family in stark terms. Complete silence was mandatory or grave consequences would follow. Overwhelmed by fear, the family complied. Years later, they shared their story with Rosales in hushed tones, admitting they had never spoken of the incident before. Such encounters were not limited to rural areas. Urban settings also experienced these strange interventions. A London report from the 1980s detailed a young man's experience with a glowing sphere hovering over residential houses. Days after his sighting, two men in black suits visited his apartment, claiming affiliation with an unnamed institute. They interrogated him meticulously about the sighting's details. When he requested identification, they simply smiled and dismissed his concerns. Upon their departure, he discovered his notebooks containing sphere sketches had vanished. Rosales noted a consistent psychological impact across these encounters. The men in black appeared with uncanny precision. Possessing detailed knowledge about each incident, witnesses frequently reported feelings of profound dread, as if their enthusiasm and curiosity were systematically drained. For Rosales, this suggested a calculated effort not just to gather information, but to actively suppress it. Despite facing significant skepticism, Rosales maintained extensive files documenting thousands of reports. These were gathered from diverse sources, translated across languages, and corroborated through multiple witnesses. While critics challenged the breadth and variability of his research, the consistent patterns remained intriguing and challenging to dismiss. Alberto Rosales dedicated his life to documenting these encounters, recognizing a pattern that transcended individual reports. Witnesses consistently described visitors who seemed almost human, but not quite, their speech stilted, movements awkward, appearances slightly off. Rosales believed the consistency was the evidence. Reports emerged across decades and cultures from people with no apparent connection. He entertained multiple theories about these mysterious figures: intelligence agents operating under secret directives, extraterrestrials in crude human disguises, or beings capable of crossing dimensional boundaries. What struck him most was their imperfection. It was as though they were attempting to mimic humanity without truly understanding it. Rosales never claimed definitive answers. Instead, he saw himself as an archivist, preserving stories for future generations. His greatest fascination wasn't with the UFOs themselves, but with the silence that followed their appearances. Witnesses repeatedly told him that the knock at the door was far more terrifying than the lights in the sky. The craft inspired awe, but the men in black inspired fear. In the 1980s, Gulf Breeze, Florida, a small coastal town known more for fishing piers and beaches, became an unexpected global UFO hotspot. Local contractor Ed Walter's photographs of bright saucer-like craft hovering over suburban homes sparked years of debate and investigation. Rosales' collection remains one of the most comprehensive resources for researchers trying to understand how deeply the men in black motif runs through UFO sighting history. As he once remarked, "The lights may come and go, but the silence they leave behind is permanent, and the silence is enforced." Odd reports of strange occurrences began in Gulf Breeze in November 1987, starting with Ed Walters' claim of seeing a UFO hovering near his house. Using his Polaroid camera, Walters captured clear images that quickly drew national attention. These photographs, though controversial, sparked widespread interest. Local residents soon started reporting their own experiences: glowing objects over water, unusual lights in the sky, and encounters with structured craft. The area became a hotspot for UFO researchers, journalists, and skeptics, drawn by more than just sightings of strange aerial phenomena. A disturbing pattern emerged alongside the UFO reports: mysterious visits from men in black. One resident, who spotted a bright disk over Pensacola Bay, received an unsettling phone call days later. The caller's voice was flat and emotionless, warning him against speaking to media. When he sought identification, the caller simply repeated the warning and hung up. Strange surveillance followed. A dark sedan would park across the street at odd hours, never staying long but appearing frequently enough to unsettle the witness. Another resident's experience was even more direct. After reporting a silent, triangular craft to local investigators, he was visited by two men in black suits arriving in an unmarked car. These men claimed to be federal agents but offered no credentials. Their questioning focused not on the craft but on the investigators and potential photographs. Their demeanor was rigid, their tone flat, and their questions repetitively strange. The witness felt less interviewed and more systematically intimidated into silence. Perhaps the most chilling account involved a young couple who photographed unusual lights near Shoreline Park. Days after sharing their photos with friends, they received an unexpected visit. Two men in dark suits, with unusually pale skin and blank expressions, demanded to see the photographs. When the couple hesitated, one stated ominously, "You will not need them. They are not yours to keep." The couple surrendered the photos. The men left without explanation, and the photographs disappeared forever. Researchers who arrived in Gulf Breeze collected these unsettling stories, adding another layer of mystery to the already bizarre UFO encounters. Not in Gulf Breeze, a coastal town under intense public scrutiny, UFO encounters mirrored classic Men in Black incidents that had been reported for decades. The phenomenon was familiar. Witnesses would see something strange, speak about it, and then be visited by mysterious figures demanding silence. The Mutual UFO Network and independent researchers began cataloging these reports alongside the sightings. They noted that while skeptics dismissed Ed Walters' photographs as a hoax, the Men in Black accounts came from multiple unrelated witnesses across the region. Many had no connection to Walters at all, simply living in Gulf Breeze during the wave of activity and having the misfortune of seeing unusual lights in the sky. One particularly disturbing case involved a man working at the nearby Pensacola Naval Air Station. After he and several colleagues reported strange lights over the Gulf, he was summoned to a private meeting. There, two unknown men in black suits confronted him, not his superiors. They questioned what he had seen and whether he intended to file a report. The man described their manner as cold and precise, unlike any officer he'd encountered before. When he pressed them for identification, they became evasive, telling him it would be in his best interest to forget what he had seen. He later confided that he was certain they were not Navy personnel. The Gulf Breeze encounters amplified the sense of paranoia gripping the town. Residents were divided. Some believed wholeheartedly in the sightings, while others dismissed them as hoaxes. For those who experienced visits or phone calls, the issue wasn't about belief, it was fear. They felt watched, monitored, and silenced. Ed Walters himself claimed harassment, speaking of strange phone calls, cars parked outside his home, and men who seemed to follow him through town. Whether these incidents were connected to the Men in Black phenomenon or the result of intense media scrutiny remains unclear. Walters insisted the pressure was real. It wasn't just the UFO, he later said, it was the people who didn't want you talking about them. Researchers investigating Gulf Breeze remained divided on the UFO photographs, but many agreed on the credibility of the Men in Black accounts. The phenomenon had transformed a quiet coastal town into a hotbed of mystery and speculation. Gulf Breeze men in black encounters were part of a broader narrative that went far beyond simple UFO sightings. Their consistent descriptions echoed reports from decades past, appearing not just in isolated farmhouses, but in suburban neighborhoods and military-adjacent communities. Local witnesses spoke of something deeper than the photographs or media frenzy. These encounters weren't easily dismissed. Intelligence agencies might have been monitoring witnesses. Some pointed to classic traits of these mysterious figures: pale skin, mechanical voices, outdated clothing, and vehicles that seemed to appear and vanish without explanation. Skeptics argued the stories were fueled by publicity surrounding the sightings, suggesting ordinary government investigators or pranksters could be mistaken for men in black. Yet the sheer consistency of descriptions challenged such explanations. The men in black appeared less concerned with UFOs themselves than with those who witnessed them. Their mission seemed singular: to instill silence. As one Gulf Breeze witness recounted years later, "The lights in the sky didn't scare me. What scared me was the knock at the door afterward. They knew things they shouldn't have, and once they came, I never wanted to see those lights again." By the decade's end, the Gulf Breeze wave had waned. Photographs were endlessly debated, with skeptics calling them staged and believers defending their authenticity. But the whispered stories carried their own weight. They spoke to a presence that existed long before Gulf Breeze and would linger long after the shadowy figures who arrived when people saw too much. The phenomenon adapted to new settings, revealing a pattern that suggested something more complex than simple misunderstandings or local rumors. These encounters reinforced the idea of a persistent, mysterious force that could not be easily explained away. No, in the small town of Kecksburg, a series of strange events unfolded that would challenge everything residents thought they knew. On a typical afternoon, around 4:45 p.m., something extraordinary happened. A brilliant fireball streaked across the sky, visible from 6 states. Newspapers in Detroit, Windsor, and Pittsburgh lit up with phone calls as people described an unusual sight: a flaming mass trailing sparks, moving in ways that suggested more than a natural trajectory. Local residents watched as the object descended into a wooded ravine near town. A young boy playing outside saw it streak overhead and vanish behind the trees. Adults in the area reported hearing a distinct thud, as if something had struck the ground, yet without the expected explosion. Curiosity drew townspeople into the woods to investigate. What they discovered became the heart of a mystery that would long be discussed. Partially embedded in the earth was an acorn-shaped object, roughly the size of a small car. Its bronze-colored surface was covered in strange markings that some compared to hieroglyphs. Unlike a typical meteorite, this object remained intact. Those who approached it spoke of a faint humming or vibration. The scene quickly transformed. Military trucks rolled in within hours, blocking roads and sealing off the wooded area. Armed soldiers were positioned along dirt lanes, keeping civilians at a distance. Alongside the uniformed personnel, other figures appeared, men in plain suits who seemed to direct the operation with an air of authority. These mysterious men questioned witnesses, pressing for details while revealing nothing about themselves. They carried no visible identification and spoke with a stern, commanding tone. Several witnesses later recalled being told in no uncertain terms to remain silent about what they had seen. NASA would later claim the object was simply a meteor. But many witnesses disagreed, insisting its flight path was too controlled to be a natural phenomenon. The speed of the military's response struck many as suspicious. Far too quick for what should have been a routine meteor strike in a rural town. The Kecksburg incident became a focal point of speculation, with more questions raised than answered. What had truly come down in those woods that day? Why such an intense military response to what was supposedly just a falling space rock? 9 local folks in a small Pennsylvania town never forgot that night when something crashed in the woods. The area was quickly cordoned off, with military and mysterious suited men taking control. A farmer who first spotted an acorn-shaped craft was warned by officials to keep silent. "You did not see this. You will not speak of it again," they told him calmly but firmly. Another local resident near the ravine witnessed a convoy of trucks hauling a covered object out of the woods late that night. When she tried reporting her experience, 2 men in suits visited her home, insisting she must have been mistaken. She was left rattled and unwilling to pursue the matter further. The incident became legendary among locals. Unlike other UFO encounters, these men in black blended seamlessly with military personnel, making it difficult to distinguish between them. Witnesses consistently described the suited figures as clinical, controlling, and distinctly out of place in their rural community. As night fell, the woods were completely sealed off. Reporters from local radio stations were turned away. John Murphy from WHJB Radio managed to collect witness interviews, but colleagues claimed his materials were later confiscated. Some suggest government officials pressured him to surrender tapes and photographs. His subsequent reporting became strangely subdued, and he eventually died in a mysterious car accident, leading to speculation about potential silencing. By the next day, the woods were empty. Official statements claimed nothing was recovered, and the incident was merely a meteor burning in the atmosphere. However, the town's residents remained unconvinced. Too many people had witnessed too much. The object in the woods, military trucks, and strange men enforcing silence. For decades, Kecksburg remained a subject of hushed conversations and local folklore. Witnesses were hesitant to come forward, fearing ridicule or further intimidation. It wasn't until the 1990s that renewed interest began to resurface, bringing the mysterious events back into public discourse. The Kecksburg incident centers on an event that compelled several witnesses to break their silence. Dark-suited, pale men emerged, seemingly intent on controlling the narrative around what locals had seen. Residents of this small Pennsylvania town still whisper about that night. Decades later, military vehicles flooded their community, and a sudden hush fell over everything. Those who were children at the time remember the strange atmosphere, an unspoken tension that something extraordinary had occurred. The object itself was acorn-shaped, sitting briefly in the forest, marked with unusual symbols. But what truly defined the incident were the men who followed. Their expressionless, commanding presence discouraged witnesses from speaking freely. Researchers remain divided about the object's origin. Some argue it was a Soviet satellite from the Cosmos series, quietly recovered by U.S. military personnel. Others point to its unusual shape and markings as evidence of something non-human. NASA's stance has been complicated, admitting in 2003 that documentation of the incident had gone missing, a statement that only deepened existing suspicions. These men in black matched a pattern seen in countless UFO cases. Their role appeared to be suppressing information and transforming a spectacular sighting into a silenced memory, whether government operatives, intelligence agents, or something more mysterious. Their effect was consistent, erasing truth and enforcing silence. For many researchers, Kecksburg represents the most compelling example of men in black intervention on American soil. It wasn't just an isolated encounter, but a coordinated operation blending military personnel with suited figures, designed to ensure a town would never fully speak about what it had witnessed. The incident remains unresolved, a tantalizing mystery that continues to intrigue those who seek to understand what truly happened that night in the Pennsylvania woods. And the brothers Edward and Fred May, along with their friend Tommy Hyer, triggered a national sensation when they claimed to see a glowing object streak across the sky and descend into a local farmer's field. Excited and frightened, they rushed to the May household and told their mother, Kathleen. Soon, they were joined by neighbors, including National Guardsman Eugene Lemon, who hiked toward the site. What they described would become legendary. At the wood's edge, the group encountered a towering figure, approximately 10 feet tall, with a spade-shaped head, glowing eyes, and long mechanical-looking arms. A hissing shriek and nauseating sulfur-like odor accompanied the creature. Terrified, the witnesses fled, convinced they had encountered something not of this earth. Newspapers across the country seized the story, dubbing the creature the Green Monster and transforming it into a thrilling national curiosity. Reporters flooded Flatwoods, and investigators debated whether the sighting was a misidentified owl, a meteor landing, or something far more mysterious. The aftermath, however, proved more unsettling than the initial encounter. In the days following the sighting, several witnesses fell ill with throat irritation, nausea, and persistent headaches. Some compared their symptoms to chemical exposure, though doctors at the time could not provide a clear explanation. Then came the visitors. Multiple Flatwoods families reported encounters with strange men in dark suits who identified themselves as investigators. These men asked pointed questions, not just about what was seen, but about how much witnesses had discussed with reporters. They discouraged further conversation, warning that talking could cause trouble. One witness described two such men arriving in a black sedan without license plates. Polite yet intimidating, they pressed her to recount the sighting in detail. Their message was clear: discretion was expected. For the community, these mysterious visitors reinforced the sense that something extraordinary and potentially dangerous had occurred on that hillside that night. In the aftermath of the strange encounter, the town was anything but quiet about what had been witnessed. Reports from various townspeople, including families with children present during the original event, began to paint a disturbing picture of subsequent encounters. Two unidentified men arrived unannounced, presenting themselves as government officials. They questioned the children directly, seeking to understand their account. However, when the children described the creature's glowing eyes and mechanical movements, the men exchanged meaningful glances and abruptly terminated the interview. They instructed the parents to silence their children, claiming it was for their own protection. Local Sheriff Robert Carr later confirmed that the town was inundated, not just by media, but by mysterious officials seemingly more intent on controlling the narrative than uncovering the truth. Some wore official uniforms, while others dressed in plain dark suits, their precise affiliations uncertain. Townspeople recalled these visitors as impatient outsiders who left an atmosphere of intimidation rather than clarity. Researchers examining the case have since noted striking similarities to classic Men in Black encounters: unmarked vehicles, vague claims of authority, and chilling warnings designed to suppress discussion. Years later, a particularly haunting account emerged. A man who had been a child at the time shared how his father, initially vocal about the sighting, was confronted at his workplace by two suited men. They warned him bluntly that continuing to discuss the event could have serious family consequences. The result was immediate. His father became silent, never again mentioning what he had witnessed. The Flatwoods incident became a complex narrative of spectacle and suppression. Media sensationalized the event, transforming it into a borderline ridiculous monster story. Simultaneously, those who were actual witnesses experienced a coordinated effort to minimize or erase their testimony. Between mocking headlines and intimidating visitors, the genuine truth quickly became obscured. For researchers, the Men in Black element added another layer of intrigue to an already mysterious encounter, making the Flatwoods story a compelling example of how official intervention can shape public perception of extraordinary events. The Flatwoods incident raises profound questions about suppression and mystery. Why would officials go to such lengths to silence witnesses if the event was simply a misidentified owl or meteor? Unmarked cars, veiled threats, and warnings to children suggest someone, whether government operatives or something more enigmatic, was deeply invested in discrediting the story. Skeptics propose these visitors might have been Air Force investigators from Project Blue Book. However, this explanation quickly unravels. Official Blue Book records show no significant follow-up on the case. Witnesses described these men as unlike typical military investigators. They were cold, secretive, and in some instances unsettlingly unnatural in their behavior. Over time, the Flatwoods monster transformed from a terrifying encounter into a piece of American folklore. The town itself embraced this legacy, erecting statues and hosting festivals that mask a darker underlying narrative. For many original witnesses, the imposed silence lasted decades. They rarely discussed their experiences, sharing details only with close family or researchers like John Keel and Gray Barker, who believed the Men in Black were real. Their reluctance revealed the profound effectiveness of the intimidation. The Flatwoods aftermath exposed something more significant than a local incident. These mysterious figures didn't target isolated researchers or UFO enthusiasts, but appeared in a rural West Virginia town, approaching ordinary families and even children whose only transgression was witnessing something extraordinary. They systematically worked to shake public perception, replacing witness testimony with sensationalized headlines and dismissive explanations. The Flatwoods legacy is dual-layered. It gifted America an enduring monster legend, with eerie descriptions and rich folklore. Simultaneously, it provided one of the earliest, clearest demonstrations of the Men in Black figures who arrived not to investigate, but to bury the truth. As one elderly witness poignantly reflected, "People laughed at us for seeing a monster, but what truly terrified me wasn't what was on the hill that night. It was who came afterward, knocking on our doors, telling us to forget. Knocking on our doors by clicking the like button and subscribing to get daily content updates."